A massive convoy snakes through the valley, filled with trash-tier criminals, and the guards keeping them in line. Our boy finds himself bound in heavy iron, his once legendary strength reduced to the rattle of rusty chains. It all started when he suddenly woke up inside the very game world he used to dominate. Back then, a silver-haired knight desperately warned him that the demon swarm was becoming far too overwhelming. Kadim didn't flinch, simply stating he'd handle the monsters himself as he gripped his massive axe. He threw himself off the cliffside, a literal human meteor crashing straight into the heart of the enemy. Now, that glorious past is gone, replaced by the dusty reality of a prisoner march under the sun. One old thief keeps whining about how he was framed, claiming he only stole a cheap bronze ring. The guard isn't having any of it, barkingly telling the prisoners to keep their mouths shut, or else. Meanwhile, the memory of shredding through those demons still lingers, a sharp contrast to his current pathetic state. Kadim hits the ground like a literal wrecking ball, turning the battlefield into a graveyard of craters. These trash-tier demons didn't even stand a chance, getting turned into bloody paste upon his impact. As the dust settles, our boy stands tall in the center of the absolute carnage he just created. Steam hisses off his skin while he stabilizes his breathing, preparing for the next wave of monsters. He realizes the demon realm isn't playing around, throwing high-level threats at him right from the jump. Reaching the great demon will be a grind, but he's clearly cut from a much tougher cloth. Even in this hellscape, he realizes he has a much bigger problem than just a few monsters. While fire rains down in the distance, he dreads the inevitable earful he's about to get. A massive explosion erupts behind him, but he doesn't even flinch, looking like a total boss. Melissa screams his name at the top of her lungs, clearly furious at his latest reckless stunt. Melissa is absolutely fuming, screaming that he shouldn't have rushed in alone like some reckless amateur. Gail simply ignores the noise, his hand gripping his blade as he prepares to dive back into the fray. Without missing a beat, Gail charges straight into the heart of the rock-skinned monster swarm. He carves through the trash-tier mobs with surgical precision, proving why they call him a true hero. Gail coolly tells her to save the lecture for later, since clearing the battlefield is the top priority. Melissa just sighs, thinking Gail is way too by-the-book and heroic for his own good while prepping magic. Nearby, the silver-haired knight clasps her hands in prayer, desperately calling for the fighting spirit of Atala. She watches the chaos with a heavy heart, worried that our boy Kadim is pushing past his breaking point. Even the veteran guards on horseback are dumbfounded, recognizing that despite his age, a paladin is still a powerhouse. One guard grits his teeth, realizing that a single wrong move against these monsters means his head will fly. A guard glares at a prisoner, asking if he really has the guts to doubt a paladin. He tells the trembling man that innocence ensures safety, so he better get back in line. Kadim watches the carnage unfold, knowing his role as the party's shield is just beginning. Our boy remembers his comrades, a group of elites handpicked to take down the great demon. As the vanguard, Kadim carries the weight of the entire party on his massive shoulders. He is the chosen warrior of Atala, the god of struggle, destined for the wilderness. Turns out, our boy is actually a transmigrator from the modern world trapped in this body. The game's plot was simple. A hero gathers friends to slay a generic demon king. But seeing these trash-tier demons up close makes the simple story feel way too real. For a modern guy who never even heard a chicken, this constant slaughter is a total nightmare. To survive this hell, our boy chugs down demon blood like it's a cheap energy drink. He realizes this world is far too cruel as the trash-tier swarm closes in for the kill. His unique blood berserker trait kicks in, granting him a massive buff that turns him into a monster. Kadim hacks through the horde, desperately hoping that killing them all will finally let him go home. Standing atop a mountain of corpses, he realizes he's becoming more like the monsters he's supposed to slay. Driven by pure instinct, he starts devouring the demons raw just to end this nightmare one day sooner. Suddenly, a high-ranking red-haired demon leaps into the fray, thinking she can take down the exhausted warrior. Turns out she miscalculated, as Kadim immediately catches her by the throat with a terrifying, bloodshot gaze. He screams that he's going to devour every single one of them until nothing remains. Our boy has completely lost it, smiling like a maniac while promising to end every last one. Kadim is completely gone, threatening to drain every drop of blood from the demon he's currently throttling. Suddenly, a blinding light pierces through his madness, as his comrades desperately scream for him to snap out. The divine intervention works, and our boy's bloodlust wavers as he starts to recognize the world around him. He looks down in horror, realizing the person he's actually choking isn't a demon, but his companion Melissa. Golden chains of magic bind his arms, forcing him to drop her before he does something truly unforgivable. As the red mist clears, Kadim stares at his hands in shock, terrified of the monster he's becoming. The scene shifts to a memory of an old prisoner who once found kinship with barbarians like him. The old-timer offers him a small token of gratitude, a simple route to help him endure the journey. Despite his massive frame, Kadim walks in chains alongside the weak, wondering how he even ended up captured. The old man just smiles, sensing that there's much more to this shackled giant than meets the eye. The surging bloodlust gnaws at our boy's sanity, making it harder to suppress the madness erupting within. Kadim fears he might lose himself completely before they even reach the great demon's doorstep. Deep inside his mind, a dark entity demands he kill and devour every single living thing around him. Thankfully, Melissa pulls him into a tight embrace, her presence acting as an anchor in the storm. She softly tells him to stop blaming himself, as he's been their shield for far too long. Kneeling among the demon corpses, Kadim can only offer a broken apology for the terror he caused. The silver-haired knight watches the emotional moment, relieved that their vanguard has finally regained his senses. She and Gordon vow to support him, ensuring the madness never claims his soul entirely. Gordon even cracks a smile, promising to beat some sense into him if he ever goes berserk again. With the crisis averted, Gail steps through the carnage to see if everyone is ready to keep moving. Gail tells our boy that if he's rested enough, it's finally time to head back out. He extends a hand, reminding the team they need to defeat the great demon together. Kadim hesitates, still feeling the weight of his madness, while Melissa stays close as his anchor. Finally, he takes the hero's hand, beginning a grueling journey that leaves them both tattered. Fast forward to the final showdown where Gail screams for his friend to strike the final blow. Our boy enters his berserker state, towering over the red-haired demon with nothing but murderous intent. The monster realizes too late that he's messed with the wrong warrior, and freezes in terror. With a massive, flaming swing of his axe, Kadim unleashes a devastating whirlwind of destruction. Gail watches the carnage, finally feeling a sense of relief that the long nightmare is ending. The demon's head flies off, marking the end of a trash-tier villain and a hard-won victory. The impact of the final blow echoes through the battlefield, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and debris. Melissa stands amidst the wreckage, her eyes searching the settling smoke for any sign of our boy. She clutches her spellbook tightly, barely able to believe that the nightmare might actually be over for good. Suddenly, a heavy hand rests on her shoulder, grounding her as she trembles from the sheer intensity. Gordon offers a weary smile, crediting divine grace for their survival, as the dust finally begins to clear. But just as Melissa starts to relax, she notices something strange happening in the sky above them. Her eyes widen in pure shock as a blinding, celestial light begins to drown out the crimson horizon. The entire canyon is swallowed by a divine radiance, making the survivors look like mere specks of dust. The silver-haired knight collapses to the ground, her senses overwhelmed by the sudden and violent shift in mana. She cries out in desperation, frantically asking where Kadim went, as the light consumes everything in sight. Kadim walks into the unknown, leaving his allies behind as the dust settles around his massive frame. Gail screams for our boy to stop, terrified that he is charging blindly into a trap he cannot escape. Instead of listening, Kadim just flashes a savage smirk, clearly savoring the chaos he is about to cause. This blatant disrespect sends Gail into a total frenzy, his pride wounded by what he sees as mockery. He labels the warrior actions as pure blasphemy and charges forward on horseback, lance leveled for the kill. Kadim does not even flinch, his cold gaze fixed on the sharp tip as it whistles through the air. A gauntleted hand reaches into the blinding radiance, grasping for a power that feels like pure divinity. Suddenly, a figure is sent plummeting down the jagged cliffs as the mountain itself seems to groan. The silver-haired knight collapses to her knees, her strength failing as she watches the world tear apart. She stares up at the pillars of light, realizing that Kadim has vanished into the celestial storm. The silver-haired knight collapses in the dirt, desperately calling out for our boy as he finally fades away. Kadim wanders through a pitch-black abyss, his footsteps leaving behind faint, glowing trails of lingering light. He notes that this suffocating darkness is exactly the same as when he first crossed over years ago. Our boy starts planning his return, dreaming of a cold beer and never playing this trash-tier game again. A pang of guilt hits him for leaving his comrades behind, but he knows he must accept reality. He accepts that the legendary warrior of Atala is dead, leaving only his true, original self behind. Suddenly, a massive glowing cross appears, signaling the long-awaited exit back to the real world. But as he nears the light, a sudden realization strikes him, sending cold sweat pouring down his face. He begins to spiral, desperately hoping this is just a nightmare as the horrific truth sinks in. Our boy can only let out a manic, broken laugh as the celestial light consumes his entire vision. Kadim lets out a manic laugh as the light fades, realizing his hard-earned freedom was just a cruel illusion. The system cruelly announces a new game plus, dragging our boy back into the nightmare he just escaped. He wakes up back at the start, stuck in a trash-tier prisoner convoy, led by the ever-stiff Gail. The heavy rattle of iron shackles confirms his worst fears as he's treated like common criminal scum again. Trudging through the dust, the massive line of captives stretches out under a deceptively peaceful blue sky. The old prisoner starts whining about only stealing a ring, completely unaware of the monster walking behind him. A frustrated guard barks at the lot of them to shut up before things get ugly on the road. Suddenly, the scene shifts as Kadim finds himself kneeling in a scorched crater amidst a hellish, red landscape. He slowly stands up, his body surging with power as the familiar heat of battle begins to rise. Gripping his massive axe, our boy realizes the demon realm is throwing elite monsters at him from the jump. A frantic merchant prisoner pleads with a guard, desperate to know what they want from him now. He swears he never sold demon byproducts and claims he was framed by someone looking for a scapegoat. The guard just stares back with a cold, hollow expression that offers the poor man no comfort. The merchant realizes some trash-tier soldiers frame innocents just to inflate their own achievements and climb the ranks. He looks at Gail, thinking it's a shame such a young paladin is already pulling these dirty tricks. The guard knows that if he makes a single wrong move, the paladin will have his head. He barks at the prisoner, asking if the man really has the guts to doubt a holy paladin. The guard lies through his teeth, promising the man hell be released safely if he's actually innocent. Defeated, the merchant trudges back into the line, unaware that his fate was sealed from the start. The guard watches him go, knowing that since Gail personally orchestrated this, the man is already a goner. The guard is sweating bullets, wondering how on earth they managed to bag a monster like this barbarian. Our boy stands tall behind the merchant, looking like a literal mountain of muscle compared to the regular trash. Even in chains, Kadim remains silent, his mind racing to make sense of this sudden, impossible reset. He remembers the bloodbath, how he tore through the demon swarm just to escape this hellish world forever. But now he's back at the start, wondering what the hell is going on with this twisted reality. He flexes his hands and realizes that while his body feels familiar, all that hard-earned power has vanished. At least the crushing madness and guilt that once consumed his soul seem to have disappeared along with it. It hits him that the New Game Plus message wasn't a joke. He's truly been forced to restart. Still, he can't wrap his head around why a game would ever kick off in such a miserable way. As he stares at the sky, an old prisoner tries to get his attention, breaking his deep train of thought. The old man offers our boy a root to chew on, hoping it makes the long trek less boring. Kadim just stares back in silence, likely wondering why this random guy is being so friendly in this hellhole. Turns out, the old-timer was saved by barbarians once, and wants to pay back that debt with this snack. Even in heavy iron shackles, our boy takes the small offering, feeling the weight of his current pathetic state. When asked how he got captured, Kadim admits he honestly has no idea how he ended up here. The old man just nods along, accepting the answer as they trudge through the dusty plains. Our boy realizes the Empire's holy men are trash-tier fanatics who hunt down anyone they label a pagan. He's dumbfounded when the old man mentions the Lucaonia Empire, since he's never heard of an empire nearby. It clicks that Lucaonia was just a kingdom in his time, making him realize he's been sent way back. He remembers Gordon's face, recalling how his old comrade used to joke about beating some sense into him. Gail kicks a pile of demon corpses, asking if the prisoners are finally rested enough to move. Our boy remains stoic, thinking it's a blessing they haven't decided to execute him just yet. The old man looks completely dumbfounded, asking what could possibly be fortunate about their miserable situation. He warns that the Empire's inquisitors are torture-obsessed lunatics who love playing with pagans like toys. The old-timer describes the trash-tier cruelty they inflict, like pouring molten metal into a prisoner's nostrils. Kadim's mind wanders back to the moment he absolutely pulverized a massive demon during the final push. The beast was reduced to a bloody mess, signaling the end of the world's greatest threat. Melissa stood in the aftermath, looking at the path of destruction our boy had carved through the swarm. She clutched her spellbook to her chest, wondering if the nightmare was truly over at last. The steady trot of horses on the dirt path snaps him back to his current grim reality. Gail rides up on his horse, demanding to know if our boy is the one causing this trouble. He looks down at Kadim, telling him to bow his head and beg for forgiveness to avoid death. The paladin wears a trash-tier smug grin, promising to let the barbarian live if he just starts crawling. Instead of trembling, Kadim just smirks, his eyes glinting with a dangerous sort of amusement. Gail's face twists in rage, unable to believe a lowly pagan would actually dare to mock him. Screaming about blasphemy, the knight charges forward, aiming his glowing spear right at Kadim's head. Our boy doesn't even flinch as the sharp tip of the weapon whistles toward his face. His grin only widens, clearly unimpressed by the paladin's flashy but predictable attempt at an execution. Suddenly, Gail looks completely dumbfounded as his certain kill shot doesn't go as planned. With a casual clap, Kadim catches the spear blade between his palms, stopping the charge with raw strength. Gail struggles against the barbarian's grip, his face turning a lovely shade of purple from the effort. The paladin desperately screams for our boy to let go of his weapon immediately. Kadim simply shrugs, deciding to grant the knight's wish with a mocking tone. He releases the spear with such force that Gail and his horse nearly topple over backward. Enraged by the humiliation, Gail vows to judge the pagan bastard right then and there. However, his bravado vanishes the moment he sees the terrifying look in the barbarian's eyes. Before the knight can react, Kadim launches himself into the air like a literal human cannonball. A massive shockwave erupts as our boy brings the hammer down on the trash-tier paladin. When the dust settles, Gail and his horse are eating dirt, completely broken by the impact. Kadim just stands there in silence, looking bored despite having just leveled a high-ranking knight. Gail grits his teeth in the dirt, cursing the pagan for daring to lay a finger on him. He struggles to his feet, convinced that as a holy agent, he cannot be defeated so easily. Our boy watches closely, knowing a paladin's durability means that last hit was just a warm-up. Suddenly, the knight's spear begins to hum, with a dangerous, righteous energy. Gail raises his weapon high, desperate to regain his pride through a divine miracle. Kadim remains unfazed, simply waiting to see what kind of trash-tier trick the paladin has left. The knight begins a frantic prayer, calling upon his god to grant him the strength for judgment. A massive pillar of light descends as Gail begs his deity to strike down the supposed demon servant. With eyes burning with fanaticism, the paladin vows to execute the barbarian in his lord's name. He lunges forward, wreathed in holy flames, putting every ounce of his remaining life into one final strike. Gail lunges forward with everything he has, his spear glowing with a blinding, righteous fury. Our boy realizes the attack is coming way too fast, leaving him with no room to maneuver. He grits his teeth, acknowledging that dodging is impossible, and he will have to take it head-on. The paladin unleashes the strike, a massive explosion of holy light consuming the entire area. The force of the impact shatters the iron shackles and sends Kadim crashing back into the dirt. As the dust settles, the knight stands tall, assuming he finally put the barbarian down for good. But Kadim slowly sits up, noticing a strange blue glow emanating from his chest. Gail is absolutely dumbfounded, unable to believe the prisoner survived a direct hit from his ultimate move. The paladin sneers, admitting that the barbarian's durability is just as ridiculous as his monstrous appearance. Kadim realizes that without his high-level skills, even a trash-tier knight like this is a serious problem. Kadim stares at his trembling hands, lamenting that even a low-tier demon would make this fight easier. He desperately scans his surroundings, trying to find a way to survive this lopsided encounter. Suddenly, a familiar pungent scent hits him, leading his gaze toward a crate, leaking dark, demonic blood. Before he can act, the heavy footsteps of the paladin echo across the dry, cracked earth. Gail looms over him, admitting the barbarian is tough but insists this is where his journey ends. The knight offers a cold smile, telling Kadim to accept his execution as a final act of divine mercy. However, the paladin's arrogant expression instantly shatters as a foul stench suddenly overwhelms his senses. He recoils in pure disgust, clutching his face to block out the rotting smell of demon remains. Seeing the opening, our boy lets out a dark chuckle, realizing the tide is finally turning. Kadim erupts into manic laughter, leaving the confused knight wondering if the barbarian has finally snapped. Kadim mocks Gail, claiming the god the paladin worships has actually chosen a barbarian instead. Without warning, our boy smashes his fist into the crate, shattering the wood like it's paper. He reaches into the wreckage and pulls out the rotting, severed head of a high-ranking demon. Gail stumbles back, his stomach turning at the sight of the putrid trophy Kadim just revealed. As the tension peaks, the strange mark on Kadim's chest begins to pulse with a faint, eerie light. He looks up with a chilling grin, his eyes hidden behind a veil of dark, murderous intent. Standing tall with the demon's head, he looks less like a prisoner and more like a predator. While the convoy continues across the vast plains, the atmosphere among the guards turns deathly silent. Dark, demonic blood begins to drip onto his skin, fueling the madness he's been suppressing. In a move that leaves everyone dumbfounded, Kadim begins drinking the demon's blood to ignite his power. The entire convoy freezes as our boy stands amidst the wreckage, a literal demon's head in his hands. Gail nearly loses his lunch, thinking Kadim has finally lost his mind to the filth of demon blood. Refusing to get his own hands dirty, the paladin orders a low-tier guard to execute the barbarian immediately. As the guard hesitates, Kadim's body begins to radiate a terrifying heat, his blood berserker trait finally awakening. The poor soldier trembles, realizing he's been sent on a suicide mission against a monster in human skin. Desperation takes over as the guard charges, hoping a single spear thrust can end this nightmare. It's a futile effort, as Kadim effortlessly catches the man's face in a grip that feels like stone. The sound of cracking bone echoes through the plains, while the dark essence of the demon fuels him. He lifts the trash-tier soldier off the ground, like he's nothing more than a bothersome insect. The guard begs for mercy, but looking into those murderous eyes, he realizes there's no humanity left. Kadim ignores the guard's pathetic pleas, his grip tightening until the man's skull begins to give way. Even the high and mighty Gail is left dumbfounded, realizing he has completely underestimated the beast he had in chains. Dark energy surges through our boy's veins as he pulverizes the trash-tier soldier with a single, blood-soaked strike. He tastes the copper in the air, calculating that this newfound strength is finally enough to break this procession. With eyes burning like embers, Kadim fully embraces the madness, knowing he has more than enough power to kill. A primal roar erupts from his lungs, the red aura of a blood berserker, signaling the end for everyone here. The remaining guards can only watch in pure terror, their knees buckling as they face a literal living nightmare. One soldier can barely find his voice, his mind shattering as he tries to process the carnage before him. He screams that they're facing a monster, while the paladin finally realizes his execution order just backfired spectacularly. Weapons hit the dirt as the guards lose all will to fight, knowing their spears are useless against such fury. The guards and prisoners scramble in a blind panic as the absolute carnage begins to unfold. Gail screams for his men to hold the line, insisting their target is just an unarmed, injured prisoner. He threatens them with the full weight of military law, desperate to maintain control over the fleeing soldiers. The paladin figures a few more spear thrusts will surely end this nightmare once and for all. Suddenly, Kadim slams a massive, decapitated demon head right at the paladin's feet, shattering his confidence. The sheer force of the impact sends Gail sliding backward, his boots scraping against the dusty earth. He hits the ground hard, his breath hitching as he struggles to process the impossible sight before him. Staring at the rotting trophy, Gail realizes this isn't just a man, but something that hunts actual monsters. Cold sweat beads on his forehead while he finally understands the true scale of the beast he's provoked. His eyes widen in pure terror, realizing that his own life is now hanging by a very thin thread. Kadim charges like a freight train, his eyes burning with the primal rage of a true blood berserker. Gail refuses to back down, planting his feet and readying his spear for one final, desperate stand. The paladin calls upon his god, Elga, begging for the divine strength to purge this supposed demon worshipper. Holy light floods his vision as he channels every ounce of mana into his next life or death strike. Our boy Kadim doesn't even flinch, leaping straight into the path of the glowing spear with reckless abandon. With a roar for his deity, Gail thrusts forward, putting his entire soul into this singular, holy move. A blinding flash of light erupts as the spear connects, seemingly swallowing the battlefield in a divine explosion. Gail wears a smug grin, convinced the barbarian is dead and should start praying for mercy. But Kadim just stares him down, completely unfazed by the trash-tier attack and asking if that was everything. The paladin is left utterly dumbfounded, realizing his ultimate move didn't even slow the monster down. Our boy connects with a heavy, blood-soaked fist that shatters the paladin's smug confidence instantly. Kadim doesn't stop there, winding up another strike with eyes that scream pure, unadulterated violence. Gail's face turns into a mess of broken teeth and regret as the impact sends him reeling. It becomes a one-sided slaughter as Kadim relentlessly pummels the elite hero into the dirt. Finally, our boy pauses with a blood-dripping fist, hearing the once proud paladin pathetically beg for his life. Gail is barely recognizable now, sobbing through a swollen face and pleading for just one chance at mercy. Looking down at the pathetic heap of armor, Kadim realizes this trash-tier hero isn't even worth the effort. He simply turns his back and walks away, leaving the broken man to stammer out a desperate thanks. But the paladin is a snake, internally cursing the barbarian and swearing he'll get his revenge later. Left alone in the dust, Gail can only gasp for air while his shattered pride burns. Gail is still delusional, internally swearing he will take revenge in the name of his goddess, Elga. But his internal monologue is cut short by the screeching sound of metal dragging across the dry dirt. Our boy isn't finished yet, slowly approaching with a discarded spear trailing behind him like a death sentence. Gail looks up, his eyes widening as the massive shadow of the barbarian completely swallows him whole. The realization hits him like a truck as he sees his own pathetic reflection in Kadim's cold eyes. Kadim mocks the paladin for praying to his god even while staring death right in the face. Channeling his berserker energy, Kadim raises the spear, looking like a literal demon bathed in a red haze. Gail can only let out a final, pathetic whimper, realizing that his goddess isn't coming to save him. With a sickening thud, the spear finds its mark, silencing the trash-tier hero's desperate pleas for good. Kadim leaves the paladin pinned to the earth, walking away without even glancing back at the bloody mess. Kadim stands amidst the carnage, his face splattered with the blood of those who dared cross him. He watches the remaining trash-tier guards scramble away, their pathetic attempts at escape only fueling his cold resolve. The soldiers scream for their lives, tripping over their own feet in a desperate bid to outrun death. Recalling a harsh lesson from his first playthrough, our boy knows mercy is just a one-way ticket to betrayal. The guards keep running until their lungs burn, praying they have put enough distance between them and the monster. One guard steals a glance back, his eyes bulging as he realizes the nightmare hasn't ended yet. Before he can even process the danger, a spear whistles through the air and ends his journey instantly. It is a total bloodbath as Kadim's precision turns the retreating soldiers into nothing more than target practice. He firmly believes in never leaving loose ends, ensuring every single witness is pinned to the dirt forever. From the tall grass, a lone survivor trembles violently, watching the red-hued demon loom in the distance. A guard hides in the bushes, praying his shallow breaths don't give away his position to the monster. Our boy senses the coward immediately, his red eyes locking onto the scent of fear lingering nearby. He doesn't even hesitate, launching a spear with enough force to shatter the sound barrier and end life. The projectile streaks through the sky like a bolt of divine judgment, closing the distance in a heartbeat. The guard doesn't even have time to scream as the iron tip pins him to the dirt forever. As Kadim turns to leave, one of the trash-tier prisoners tries to act friendly by calling him brother. The old man thinks he's found an ally, praising Kadim for taking out that annoying paladin leader earlier. He even has the audacity to ask for his shackles to be removed, completely misreading the entire situation. Kadim answers with a single, brutal strike that paints the landscape in a fresh coat of thick crimson. The rest of the captives stand there dumbfounded, realizing they've just traded one nightmare for something much worse. Kadim remembers a brutal lesson from his first playthrough. Mercy is just a death sentence in disguise. The trash-tier prisoners scramble back in terror, finally realizing that their savior is actually their executioner. Our boy knows he can never leave loose ends if he plans on surviving this new cycle. One captive desperately begs for mercy, crying out that they haven't done anything to deserve this slaughter. Kadim remains unmoved by the pathetic pleas, looming over the man with a cold, predatory focus. His eyes glow a predatory red as he ruthlessly silences the last witness to his awakening. A heavy silence falls over the clearing while the blood berserker stands still among the fresh carnage. The field is now littered with corpses, ensuring the secret of his return stays buried in the dirt. He knows that if these rats talked, the Empire would send high-ranking holy knights to hunt him down. Tightening his grip on the spear, our boy decides that the risk of being followed is simply too high. The merchant prisoner can barely breathe, his body trembling uncontrollably as the reality of his situation sinks in. He collapses onto the grass, clutching his head while trying to process the absolute slaughter he just witnessed. Suddenly, a massive shadow looms over him as our boy approaches with a spear dripping in fresh blood. Kadim stares down at the pathetic man, coldly noting that this rat is the very last witness remaining. Without a hint of hesitation, he raises his weapon, ready to finish the job and bury his secrets. The merchant screams that this is completely unfair, his voice cracking as he stares at the sharp iron tip. Looking like a literal god of death, Kadim towers over the kneeling man who is shaking like a leaf. The man breaks down into tears, desperately pleading for his life and claiming he hasn't done anything wrong. Our boy doesn't even blink, simply asking the trash-tier merchant why he should even bother sparing a nobody. The prisoner wails about his family waiting back home, crying that he was only framed for his crimes. Kadim admits the guy might be innocent, but innocence isn't enough to save him from a spear. Realizing his life is on the line, the merchant shrieks that he can serve as a guide. He begs for a chance, hoping his knowledge of the land is worth more than his blood. Our boy pauses, actually intrigued by the idea of someone who knows the lay of the land. The merchant explains he's traveled everywhere, so Kadim decides to test him with a few critical questions. Hez confused because he remembers Lucanian as a kingdom, not the massive empire it is today. The trash-tier merchant looks completely dumbfounded by such a basic question about the world's history. He wonders if this barbarian is from some isolated wasteland that lost contact with civilization centuries ago. Kadim's patience wears thin as he demands an answer, his gaze making the man's skin crawl. Turns out, it's been nearly 250 years since the founding emperor established the current empire. Kadim asks about the old calendar, trying to gauge exactly how much time he has truly lost. The merchant stammers that the old system is dead, but it would be roughly the year 1130. Our boy is stunned to realize the calendar he once knew is now considered ancient history. He presses further, demanding to know the continent's current state and the fate of the Elga faith. The merchant explains that the once unified land is now effectively divided between three major, competing powers: He adds that the Elga faith has grown massive, while the demon realm remains a lethal, unknown mystery. Kadim is visibly shaken to hear that, in this era, no one ever returns from the demon lands alive. He thinks back to his old crew, Gail, Melissa, Gordon, and Cyril, wondering if they survived the centuries. The merchant initially claims he has never heard those names, making Kadim feel completely isolated in time. Suddenly, the man's eyes widen as he realizes the name Melissa actually sounds incredibly familiar to him. Kadim is dumbfounded, trying to process how his old friend's name could be just a faint memory. The merchant mumbles about names like Elisa or Melissa, sensing he's heard them in some dusty corner of history. Our boy can't believe the legends who saved the world are forgotten, questioning if this is even his timeline. He stares intensely, his mind racing to bridge the gap between his memories and this cold, new reality. Looking at a fresh corpse, he demands to know why demons still roam, if the war was supposedly won. The merchant lists wild theories, from divine punishment to a mad archmage opening gates to another world. He points to the heavens, claiming only the gods truly know why the world has fallen into such ruin. Kadim looks up, the weight of the mystery pressing down as a strange blue light flickers on his chest. With a sharp thud, he readies his weapon, signaling that the time for talk is finally over. Our boy looms over the terrified man, ready to move on now that he has his grim answers. Kadim looks over the hills, realizing he is stuck in a world 3 centuries past his prime. Our boy pieces it together, concluding that this era is a staggering 300 years after his first playthrough. He laments being kicked out of his original world, only to be stranded in this outdated, decaying reality. Memories of Melissa, Gordon, and the old crew haunt him, as they were his only true anchors. It hits him hard that those loyal comrades are nothing more than a handful of dust in this era. Surveying the fresh pile of trash-tier corpses, he wonders if there is even a point to this madness. He questions if reaching the ending again will even send him home, or just reset the nightmare once more. The thought of a never-ending loop of new games makes him feel like a puppet for some sadistic god. Closing his eyes, he suppresses the rising rage, trying to find a spark of purpose in the dark. With a sudden snap, he breaks his weapon as the blue light signals a new, violent path forward. The framed merchant stares in total shock, unable to process the grim scene unfolding right before his eyes. Our boy Kadim doesn't hesitate, pressing a jagged spear tip against his own throat with terrifying resolve. He grips the makeshift blade tightly, ready to cut ties with a world that has become a nightmare. The merchant panics and frantically asks what he is trying to do, but Kadim is far beyond caring. He figures if he is destined to restart this cursed journey, there is no better time than now. His knuckles whiten as he prepares to plunge the steel home, seeking an escape from the endless loop. All he hopes for is that death brings actual peace instead of another trash-tier game-over screen. Closing his eyes, he prepares to leave this decaying reality behind and find out what lies beyond. The sharp edge bites into his skin, a final act of defiance against the god pulling his strings. Suddenly, a memory of Melissa surfaces, recalling her simple dreams of teaching magic after the great demon fell. Our boy's eyes snap open as the mention of a familiar name halts his blade. He towers over the merchant, demanding to know if the man truly recognizes the name Melissa. The terrified merchant stammers that the name belongs to the legendary first master of the Mage Tower. Kadim's grip tightens as he learns the tower sits far away in the city of Vestana. It turns out they are deep in Imperial territory, making the trek a grueling 2-month journey. He stands there in silence, processing the fact that his old comrade might still be out there. A grim smirk finally touches his lips because the universe clearly isn't done with him yet. He realizes Melissa's memory is a tether, preventing him from seeking a trash-tier exit from this world. Kadim orders the merchant to lead the way, ignoring the man's pathetic pleas about his family. Even as the merchant grumbles about his lost time, our boy's mind is already set on the horizon. Kadim grabs the merchant, promising to give him the most precious thing he can as payment. He looks the man dead in the eye and declares that payment is his very life. A blood-stained spear stands forgotten in the dirt, a grim reminder of the recent slaughter. Our boy orders the merchant to grab the keys and gear up because they are leaving immediately. He spots a discarded blade among the wreckage, searching for anything to replace his broken equipment. While it isn't a top-tier weapon, he figures he can forge it into something decent using his unique trait. He eyes a holy spear but knows the consecrated weapon would just reject a monster like him. A wave of nostalgia hits as he wishes he had the legendary axe from his first playthrough. The merchant manages to unshackle himself, feeling lucky to be alive while wondering what his captor is up to. He turns around and is dumbfounded to see Kadim casually draining blood from a severed demon head. Our boy finishes packing his meager supplies, securing a fresh blade and a water skin for the long trek. He tells the terrified merchant it is time to move out before any more unwanted guests show up. They leave the wreckage behind, setting their sights on the mage tower to find some real answers. As they vanish, a murder of crows descends upon the carnage left in the wake of his awakening. The scavengers begin their feast, picking at the remains of those who were foolish enough to cross him. Days later, a search party finally arrives, finding the bloated corpse of a man named Linton pinned down. A knight named Edan reports that the entire convoy, soldiers and prisoners alike, has been systematically wiped out. Helia stares at the devastation, her green eyes cold as she processes the sheer scale of the slaughter. She orders Eden to find clues, knowing the archbishop won't accept a report of such a pathetic failure. Helia just scoffs at the dead man's incompetence, clearly having no sympathy for a trash-tier loser like Linton. Helia stands over the body, wondering what kind of bastards would dare murder one of the archbishop's knights. She doesn't care who these trash-tier killers are, but her green eyes burn with a cold, vengeful fury. Whoever did this is going to pay the ultimate price once she finally hunts them down. As night falls, a pale moon hangs over the forest, masking the movements of those in the shadows. Deep in the woods, our boy Kadim is finally getting some rest while the campfire slowly dies out. The embers crackle softly in the dark, the only sound in an otherwise deathly silent campsite. He looks surprisingly peaceful for a man who just turned an entire convoy into a crimson smear. Nearby, a clean bandage sits ready, a small sign of the meager supplies they managed to scavenge. Suddenly, the silence is broken by the sound of someone gasping for air while sprinting through the brush. Someone is running for their life, desperate to put as much distance as possible between them and the carnage. The merchant finally thinks he's managed to slip away from the carnage and into the safety of night. He knows he has to put as much distance as possible between himself and that terrifying monster. Looking back, he realizes how dumbfounded he was to think a traveling companion would make things easier. To him, our boy is a literal demon-eating barbarian who treats human lives like trash-tier obstacles. He tries to play the obedient servant by offering snacks, but Kadim just responds with a deathly silence. Even when he offers a warm blanket, the barbarian doesn't even acknowledge his pathetic existence. He starts to ask a question but quickly shuts his mouth, fearing any noise might trigger a massacre. Kadim just sits there like a stone statue, his presence alone feeling like a heavy, suffocating weight. To the merchant, he isn't even human anymore, just a wild predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He realizes that if the silence was his only problem, he might have actually kept his sanity. Kadim watches the merchant struggle uphill, realizing this guide is more of a burden than a help. Our boy bluntly tells him he is way too slow, his patience wearing thinner than a trash-tier blade. The merchant is losing his mind because even his best pace cannot match the barbarian's casual stroll. He stares in pure terror, realizing he is tied to a monster that does not understand human exhaustion. Every time he catches his breath, Kadim is already miles ahead, treating the mountain like flat ground. Kadim just stands there with his arms crossed, his silent judgment feeling heavier than the merchant's pack. The merchant feels those cold eyes promising a crushed skull if he does not pick up the pace. He wonders if the barbarian's legs are made of steel, since his own are currently turning into jelly. At this rate, he is convinced the journey will kill him long before they reach the destination. Desperation finally sets in as he realizes his only hope for survival is finding a way to escape. The merchant finally sees his opening and bolts into the night, gasping for every bit of precious air. He believes he has finally caught a break, thinking the terrain will mask his tracks from that monster. Despite the relief of escaping, the sheer terror of the situation has him sobbing as he pushes his limits. He suddenly remembers his bag, which contains his entire life savings and every valuable he has ever owned. He briefly considers turning back, but realizes waking the sleeping barbarian is a literal death sentence. Deciding his life is worth more than some trash-tier trinkets, he leaves his fortune behind and keeps moving. After running until his lungs burn, he stops to catch his breath, confident that he has finally won. He starts celebrating his newfound freedom, only for a bone-chilling voice to ask where he is headed. His heart nearly stops, as pure, unadulterated dread washes over him, freezing the blood in his veins. Our boy is completely dumbfounded, unable to comprehend how the barbarian tracked him down so effortlessly. Kadim looms over the coward, asking why he's trying to ditch him in the middle of the night. His eyes flash with a dangerous red light as he wonders if the rat no longer wants his payment. The merchant is shaking like a leaf, his mind racing for a lie that won't get him killed. He hits the dirt, begging for mercy and claiming he's committed a crime worthy of a painful death. Groveling in the grass, he prays that the barbarian will show him just an ounce of pity today. Kadim isn't buying the act and demands a real reason so he can fix the problem for good. He stares him down, making it clear that excuses won't save him from the consequences of his flight. The merchant finally cracks, admitting that the barbarian's insane pace is simply too much for his weak body. He explains that he felt his heart would give out if he tried to keep up any longer. Closing his eyes tight, our boy prepares for the end, certain that his journey ends right here. Kadim remains silent for a long moment, weighing the merchant's desperate confession against their urgent mission. Suddenly, our boy stands up and tells the terrified man they are heading back to find a spot. He decides to show a rare bit of mercy, promising to walk a little slower from now on. Kadim treks through the night, his massive silhouette moving steadily under the pale glow of the moon. The merchant is left completely dumbfounded, unable to believe the barbarian actually took his weakness into account. Soon, a small campfire crackles to life, its orange flames dancing against the oppressive darkness of the forest. While the merchant finally drifts off, Kadim stays awake, acting as a silent guardian in the dangerous wild. The poor guy is still losing it in his sleep, tossing and turning while begging for his life. Our boy just watches him, wondering if the trauma of the massacre will ever truly leave the merchant's mind. He realizes his own frantic urgency is just a leftover habit from his brutal first playthrough of this world. Kadim flashes back to the hellish demon realm, where he and his old crew barely survived the madness. Our boy takes a deep breath, finally tasting air that doesn't reek of blood and sulfur. He realizes this world is a paradise compared to that wasteland, even if the madness still lingers. By morning, he decides the merchant is actually a top-tier guide worth keeping around for the journey. The merchant suggests a detour, explaining that the borders are currently crawling with guards looking for trouble. He waits nervously for a response, knowing one wrong word could end his life right there. Kadim simply agrees to the plan, making the merchant feel like he has finally earned some trust. Turns out Kadim's mental map is 3 centuries out of date, making a local guide absolutely essential. The merchant warns him that holy knights are zealots who would hunt a barbarian down on sight. Drinking his water, Kadim finally understands why the demon threat feels so strangely quiet in this era. Kadim stares at his dwindling supply of blood, realizing he needs a fresh source before this batch spoils. The cold night wind howls through the trees as the duo continues their trek under the crescent moon. Our boy suddenly stops when the merchant spotted something through the dense foliage, catching them both off guard. A small, quiet village sits nestled in the valley, looking like a perfect spot to rest for the night. The merchant suggests they try their luck at this pioneer settlement for some food and a warm bed. Kadim narrows his eyes, sensing something off about the eerie silence hanging over the wooden huts. The merchant starts sweating, noticing that not a single light is flickering despite it being peak dinner time. They find the main gate swung wide open and completely unguarded, which is a massive red flag. While the guide wonders if the place is abandoned, Kadim decides they need to investigate the shadows themselves. The merchant is absolutely dumbfounded by the lack of guards, fearing demons already cleared the place out. The village is eerily silent, save for the creaking of old wood as they step onto the porch. Our boy marches forward with a cold gaze while the merchant trails behind, shaking like a leaf. When the guide mentions potential monsters or demons, Kadim just grips his blade, his battle instincts kicking in. He draws his massive sword with a sharp shring, ready to paint the town red if needed. Instead of being afraid, he actually smirks, thinking that a good fight is exactly what he needs. They step into the heart of the settlement, finding nothing but abandoned carts and long, dark shadows. The merchant starts panicking, wondering where everyone went since the place doesn't even look abandoned. Suddenly, Kadim plants his feet and comes to a dead halt, sensing a presence nearby. His eyes sharpen as he scans the perimeter, his senses heighten to a razor's edge. The merchant is completely dumbfounded, nervously asking why his terrifying protector has suddenly stopped in his tracks. Kadim notices a single open door, realizing something is off about this silent settlement. Suddenly, a gray, calloused foot steps out from the darkness, signaling a hidden ambush. A crazed goblin lunges forward, screeching as it swings a jagged blade at our boy. The creature's eyes are glowing, a sinister red, showing it's completely lost to a mindless bloodlust. Kadim doesn't even blink, decapitating the trash-tier monster before it can even land a scratch. The goblin's head spins through the air, its life snuffed out in a single, effortless motion. The merchant nearly jumps out of his skin, falling back as the headless corpse thuds down. But the party is just getting started as more heavy footsteps echo from the deep shadows. An entire pack of these green runts emerges, armed to the teeth and ready for blood. Kadim knows these cowards shouldn't be this bold unless some higher power is pulling their strings. Kadim smirks, realizing this monster-infested dump is exactly where he needs to be for his next move. A beefy goblin charges in, swinging a heavy club with mindless, red-eyed fury at our boy. He doesn't hesitate, unleashing a blinding sword strike to greet the incoming trash-tier mob head-on. The other runts stand there dumbfounded, completely caught off guard by his sheer speed and overwhelming power. He tightens his grip, his muscles bulging as he prepares to turn this cave into a total slaughterhouse. Another crazed goblin lunges forward, screeching like a banshee, while brandishing a rusty, jagged kitchen knife. Kadim cuts through the creature like a hot knife through butter, showing absolutely no mercy to these pests. A head goes flying as he continues his dance of death, painting the walls with fresh goblin blood. He effortlessly parries a desperate strike, his blade ringing out as he maintains his perfect, lethal rhythm. Even as more of them swarm him, Kadim remains cold and focused on wiping every last one out. Kadim moves like a blur, closing the distance before the trash-tier pests can even blink. He drives his blade deep into a goblin's gut, ending its miserable life in a single heartbeat. The creature desperately tries to grab the cold steel, but its strength is already fading fast. With a brutal twist, he tears through the monster, painting the floor with a spray of foul blood. Our boy stands tall amidst the carnage, his expression as cold as the iron in his hand. The merchant trembles behind him, frantically asking if the bloody nightmare is finally over. Kadim admits he isn't sure, sensing that the real threat is still lurking nearby. Suddenly, a piercing screech echoes through the cave, sending a fresh wave of terror through the merchant. A massive, green hand grips the wood, signaling that a much bigger problem has just arrived. A hulking goblin champion emerges from the dark, clutching a struggling, muffled captive in its filthy grasp. The merchant is absolutely dumbfounded when he realizes the goblin's captive is just a helpless little girl. The massive trash-tier beast lets out a deafening screech, clearly not planning on letting her go easily. Without a second thought, our boy sends his blood-stained blade spinning through the air with lethal precision. The iron sword finds its mark, burying itself deep into the back of the monster's thick skull. A sickening thud echoes as the blade splits bone, ending the creature's rampage in an instant. The goblin champion collapses like a sack of bricks, sending the terrified girl tumbling to the cold ground. The merchant trembles, nervously asking what would have happened if that massive sword had missed and hit the kid. Kadim just scoffs while untying her, knowing his precision is far too high for such a pathetic mistake. He stares down at the trembling child, his gaze cold and focused on the information she might hold. Despite her tears, our boy bluntly tells her he has questions that need answering right now. Kadim tries the tough guy approach, but the merchant quickly steps in to play the good cop instead. He offers the terrified girl some sweet licorice root to calm her nerves while she cautiously takes a bite. Seeing her relax, our boy admits the merchant actually has a surprisingly decent way with children. The merchant sadly mentions his own son is around her age, explaining his soft spot for the kid. Kadim remains silent, likely wondering how a man this soft survived the harsh world for so long. Through a mouthful of sweets, the little girl starts crying out for her mother in a heartbreaking voice. The merchant immediately promises to reunite them, but Kadim just watches the scene with a skeptical gaze. Tears stream down her face as she confesses that her parents were actually the ones who abandoned her. This sudden revelation catches our boy off guard, making him realize her situation is even grimmer than expected. The merchant stands there completely dumbfounded, realizing the true monsters weren't just the green-skinned trash they killed. Kadim finally connects the dots, realizing the dark reality of why this child was left alone in the woods. A woman's frantic scream for her baby suddenly shatters the silence, catching our boy and the merchant off guard. The villagers rush forward in a panic, desperately shushing her for fear of drawing the trash-tier monsters back. She practically tackles the girl in a hug, seemingly overwhelmed that her daughter is actually still breathing. Tears of relief stream down her face as she offers up desperate prayers for this impossible survival. The rest of the mob stops dead, staring at the mountain of goblin corpses our boy effortlessly created. One man looks at Kadim with pure terror, wondering if a single human truly ended the swarm alone. Our boy isn't interested in being a hero and simply denies being the one responsible for the carnage. He gives a cold, sarcastic response, claiming his blade was the one that did all the heavy lifting. His eyes turn icy as he demands they explain why they were trash enough to sacrifice their own children. The villagers hang their heads in shame, admitting they sold their souls to a literal demon for survival. They explain how they burned the forest to settle, thinking they had cleared out the trash-tier goblin nests. Our boy listens as they describe how the remaining monsters suddenly turned into organized, bloodthirsty killers. The slaughter was relentless, leaving the local men desperate and completely outmatched by the green-skinned swarm. When the able-bodied men finally tried to fight back, they found something far worse than a simple scout. Emerging from the shadows was a terrifying champion, a monster radiating a level of malice they couldn't withstand. Realizing they were pathetic and weak, the village elders chose to surrender rather than face total extinction. Instead of a massacre, the monster demanded a weekly tribute, forcing the entire village to kneel in submission. The price for their lives was the most useless child from every household, a truly gut-wrenching demand. The merchant is absolutely dumbfounded, screaming at them for being insane enough to actually sacrifice their own children. The villagers snap back with trash-tier excuses, claiming they had to sacrifice children or face certain starvation. Our boy has heard enough of their pathetic justifications and slams the table to silence the entire room. He leans in with a cold, piercing gaze, asking exactly how many horns were on the monster's head. The villager is completely dumbfounded by the question, stuttering that the creature didn't actually have any horns. Kadim falls into a grim silence, likely realizing that the threat isn't a true demon from his past. Without wasting another second, he grips his sword and commands the cowards to start leading the way. The men look at him with pure confusion, trembling as they ask where he wants to be taken. Standing tall with an aura of absolute dominance, he prepares to hunt the beast that terrified these people. With a look of pure steel, he declares that they are heading straight for the demon's lair. The villager can only stare in shock, still processing the fact that someone is actually volunteering for certain death. Kadim calculates that a hornless beast is just a lesser primordial, making it a simple warm-up for his blade. He tightens his grip on his iron sword, signaling that the time for talk is officially over. The lead villager looks on in pure disbelief, struggling to comprehend why anyone would willingly seek out the beast. Our boy stands tall, his massive frame casting a shadow that demands immediate obedience from the trembling peasants. With a gaze that could cut glass, he confirms they are heading straight into the heart of the lair. A torch flares to life, cutting through the gloom as the hunt for the monster finally begins in earnest. Kadim leads the way through the dark, followed by a group of men who are clearly out of their league. The bearded man starts stammering about their poverty, terrified that they can't afford the protection of such a warrior. Kadim shuts him down instantly, explaining that his own goals are the only payment he requires for this slaughter. Relieved that they won't be losing their last coins, the villager offers his heartfelt thanks to the mysterious mercenary. Kadim grabs a heavy axe, knowing a single blade won't suffice for the Carnage's planning. They finally reach the jagged entrance of the cave, where the demon is said to be hiding. The trash-tier villagers stall at the threshold, their torches flickering against the overwhelming darkness of the lair. Our boy stands like a statue, completely unfazed by the ominous aura radiating from the deep. Terrified of a counterattack, the villagers make up excuses to retreat and wait safely in the distance. The merchant is left dumbfounded, realizing he's been ditched by the very men who led them here. Kadim drags the merchant along, declaring that cowards are a hindrance and he needs a light source. The poor guy realizes his survival now depends entirely on staying glued to the barbarian's side. They venture into the gloom together, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the cold stone walls. The merchant can't help but ask why Kadim isn't disgusted by the villagers' spineless betrayal of their children. Kadim asks the merchant if he has ever actually come face to face with a living demon before. The merchant nervously admits he has only ever seen their rotting corpses being traded on the black market. Our boy warns him that staring into the eyes of a real demon changes a human soul forever. He explains that such overwhelming terror shatters all nobility, leaving behind nothing but a desperate, primal survival instinct. The merchant is still sickened, arguing that even the lowest beasts wouldn't toss their own young to monsters. Kadim keeps moving, noting that survival often forces people to wade through the absolute worst kind of filth. Still, the poor guy can't stop thinking about the crushing betrayal and loneliness those abandoned children must feel. He questions the point of living if one has to throw away their very humanity just to see tomorrow. When the merchant realizes our boy has suddenly stopped in his tracks, he turns back, feeling completely dumbfounded. Kadim wonders if this simple merchant actually possesses a stronger moral compass than a battle-hardened player like himself. The merchant nervously asks if he overstepped, wondering if those poor kids could even still be alive. Our boy stays silent for a moment, his mind weighing the cruel logic of the monsters they're hunting. He explains that a truly wicked demon would keep them breathing, just to use them as leverage later. The merchant is completely dumbfounded, struggling to understand why a monster would ever show such twisted mercy. Suddenly, Kadim's expression turns cold as he reaches for a heavy axe, making the merchant's heart skip. Without a word of warning, he raises the weapon high, looking like he's about to end the guide. The terrified man lets out a pathetic scream, certain that his journey ends right here in this cave. The axe whistles through the air with lethal precision, narrowly missing the merchant's trembling head. It thuds deep into the darkness behind him, striking a hidden threat that was creeping up in silence. The merchant is left dazed, realizing our boy wasn't aiming for him, but the trash-tier monsters lurking nearby. A monstrous threat emerges from the shadows, its heavy footsteps echoing through the damp, narrow cave. The axe cut him through finds its mark, splitting a goblin's skull before the creature can even react. But one kill isn't enough, as dozens of glowing red eyes begin to flicker in the darkness. A whole swarm of these trash-tier monsters lunges forward, their screeching cries filling the air with dread. Kadim remains calm, ordering the terrified merchant to keep the torch steady so he can see his prey. With a sudden burst of speed, our boy lunges forward, his boots kicking up dust as he engages. The lead goblin barely has time to shriek before a cold blade flashes toward its throat. He drives his sword home with brutal efficiency, making sure this monster never breathes another word. His grip is like iron, crushing the creature's arm as he prepares to clear the path. Tossing the corpse aside like garbage, Kadim sets his sights on the next wave of green-skinned pests. Kadim feels the jarring impact against his blade, realizing these pests are slightly more durable than he first thought. He quickly notes the stalagmites crowding the cave, knowing wide swings will only get his sword stuck in stone. The trash-tier monsters continue to snarl and hiss, completely unaware that their numbers mean nothing to our boy. To ensure his weapon doesn't slip during the bloodbath, he tightly wraps a leather strap around his iron grip. The swarm lunges forward with a collective shriek, but Kadim just stands his ground, ready for the grim harvest. He executes a precise, controlled arc, cutting through the damp cave air with the grace of a seasoned executioner. His blade finds a goblin's skull with a sickening crunch, splitting it open before the creature can even scream. Moving like a whirlwind of death, he systematically dismantles the pack, leaving a trail of green gore behind him. Surveying the carnage, he decides his sword needs a little help and prepares to put an axe to work. He snatches the heavy tool and buries it deep into another green skull, proving he is a master of slaughter. Kadim continues his relentless dance of death, turning the cave into a literal slaughterhouse for these trash-tier monsters. He splits skulls and severs limbs with such clinical precision that the goblins don't even have time to scream. As a severed head rolls to a stop, our boy doesn't even blink, focused only on the next kill. The merchant can barely keep his lunch down, utterly dumbfounded by the sheer brutality unfolding right before his eyes. Holding his torch high, the merchant realizes one man has single-handedly turned an entire horde into a pile of meat. Seeing their kin butchered like cattle, the remaining green-skinned cowards finally break rank and scramble deeper into the darkness. Blood drips steadily from the heavy axe as the merchant frantically points out that the survivors are fleeing. Kadim coldly explains that they're following them because the survivors will lead them straight back to the demon leader. With the merchant trailing behind in a cold sweat, they press on, following the trail of fear and gore. Just as the path begins to tighten, the cave opens up into a massive chamber where the real threat awaits. The duo enters a suspiciously wide cavern, and the merchant immediately suspects they've stumbled into the goblin's main base. A chilling cackle echoes through the damp air, signaling that they aren't alone in this godforsaken hole. Our boy senses a demonic presence nearby and warns his terrified guide to keep his distance, but stay put. He explains that running is a death sentence, as the pack would hunt the merchant down in seconds. Kadim's gaze sharpens as he locks onto a threat emerging from the shadows, his instincts screaming for blood. In a blur of motion, he prepares to strike before the enemy can even register his presence. He swings his heavy axe with lethal precision, the blade already thirsting for more monster hide. Suddenly, a massive red-skinned monstrosity looms over them, leaving the merchant absolutely dumbfounded and paralyzed with fear. The hulking leader mocks Kadim, noting that he clearly isn't one of the pathetic villagers they usually prey upon. The beast finds the intrusion amusing, clearly underestimating the monster-slaying machine standing right in front of him. Kadim realizes the situation is far more dangerous than the rumors suggested. He notices a small horn sprouting on the beast, a clear sign of demonic evolution. Our boy curses his luck, knowing this trash-tier hunt just turned into a real fight. The red-skinned monstrosity radiates a murderous aura that fills the entire cavern. Kadim notes that the creature is transitioning from a lesser demon to a much deadlier intermediate rank. The beast sneers, clearly enjoying the look of grim realization on the warrior's face. Suddenly, the monster vanishes in a blur of speed that defies its massive size. Kadim barely has time to track the movement, as the air itself seems to scream. Their weapons collide with a deafening clang, sending sparks flying through the darkness. The demon mocks human weakness while pushing back, relishing the thought of another obedient victim. Kadim realizes he only blocked that last strike by pure instinct after losing track of the beast's speed. Our boy confirms this trash-tier hunt just got serious, since no lesser demon possesses this kind of raw agility. The red-skinned freak fumes over his fallen subordinates and demands that the human beg for his life. Kadim calculates his odds, knowing an intermediate demon usually requires an entire unit of elite soldiers to take down. The monster flashes a sadistic grin, claiming he will give the warrior one single chance to survive this encounter. He points a wicked claw at Kadim, ordering him to stop using his arm if he wants to live. The beast demands Kadim hack off his own limb and consume every bit of flesh and bone right there. Our boy admits that in his current weakened state, A fully evolved intermediate demon would be a death sentence. However, he notices the creature's horn hasn't fully developed, meaning it hasn't reached its peak power just yet. The monster grows impatient, wondering why the human is just standing there instead of mutilating himself as ordered. Kadim slams his sword into the dirt, signaling he is done listening to the monster's arrogant yapping. He pulls out a hidden pouch, mockingly calling the beast nothing more than a trash-tier blood bag. With a quick slash, he rips the leather open and lets the thick, dark essence spill out. The monster freezes in place, suddenly recognizing the terrifying and familiar scent of high-grade demonic blood. Our boy ignores the creature's confusion and chugs the liquid to force a desperate, temporary awakening. He tosses the empty skin aside like garbage, having already extracted every drop of its power. His heart hammers violently against his ribs as a suffocating red aura begins to consume his frame. Kadim lets out a primal roar, his muscles bulging as he embraces the agonizing surge of raw energy. The red-skinned freak begins to tremble, realizing he has made a fatal mistake by underestimating this human. With eyes glowing a murderous crimson, our boy is finally ready to tear the monster limb from limb. Kadim notes the old demon blood is working, though he needs to finish this before the effect fades. The red-skinned freak is dumbfounded that a mere human could make him feel such bone-chilling terror. Refusing to accept his fear, the monster screams that he will be the one to end our boy. He lunges forward with a desperate strike, hoping his new demonic strength is enough to bridge the gap. Kadim knows demons are usually cunning, but thinks those new horns have clouded the trash-tier creature's judgment. The monster's claws tear through the air with a sharp swish, but they find nothing but empty space. With his senses heightened by the blood, our boy can finally track every single move the beast makes. He brings his axe down in a heavy arc, meeting the monster's desperate offense with overwhelming force. The impact sends the creature reeling back as it lets out a pained shriek of pure frustration. However, Kadim notices his weapon is starting to fail. Realizing his axe cannot handle this much raw power, Kadim realizes his axe is failing, but he is ready to use his sword or even his bare fists. The monster growls in a blind rage, refusing to accept that a mere human is actually overpowering him. It screams that our boy is unforgivable, lashing out with everything its pathetic demonic body has left. Kadim doesn't even blink, stepping forward with cold, red eyes as he prepares for the final execution. He dual wields his failing axe and a scavenged sword, looking like a true god of war. With a sudden burst of speed, he brings the blade down in a devastating and heavy overhead strike. The steel bites into the monster's guard, letting out a screeching sound as the two forces collide. The impact is so heavy that the beast's legs buckle, cracking the very ground beneath its feet. The trash-tier boss is completely dumbfounded, wondering how a human could possess such terrifying and overwhelming strength. Kadim just stares him down, a blood-soaked predator ready to end this pathetic struggle once and for all. The impact rings out with a violent clang as their weapons finally meet in a shower of sparks. Our boy doesn't give an inch, his red eyes burning with the cold intent of a true predator. The trash-tier boss is utterly dumbfounded, unable to comprehend how a mere human possesses such overwhelming, destructive power. It lets out a desperate, guttural screech, realizing its life is hanging by a very thin thread. Even as the beast lashes out with its razor-sharp claws, Kadim remains focused on the killing blow. A strike connects with his shoulder, but he barely flinches, fueled by the madness of a blood berserker. The monster is forced back, its claws digging deep furrows into the earth as it tries to stabilize. Not letting up for a second, Kadim puts his entire weight into a massive, horizontal cleave. The blade whistles through the air, aiming straight for the creature's throat to end this pathetic dance. He follows through with a spin, leaving the staggered champion gasping for air in his wake. Our boy winds up for a devastating blow, his eyes burning with the rage of a true predator. Sensing the impending doom, the trash-tier boss realizes it's in way over its head and tries to bolt. Kadim's strike connects with the force of a falling mountain, shattering the very ground beneath them. He stands tall amidst the rubble, looking down at the pathetic creature that dared to challenge him. The champion is completely dumbfounded, wondering what kind of monster could possibly possess such overwhelming, raw power. It stares at Kadim's blood-soaked form, finally realizing that the man before it isn't human at all. Kadim's gaze is cold and unwavering, his mind focused solely on the total annihilation of his prey. Shaking with pure terror, the beast concludes that it's facing a monster wearing the skin of a man. In a desperate bid for survival, the creature leaps away, trying to put distance between itself and death. It clings to the cavern walls like a cornered rat, looking down at the hunter waiting below. The champion realizes he is completely outmatched, and that charging our boy head-on is a total death sentence. Suddenly, he spots a potential opening and shrieks for the lower-tier mobs to clear the path immediately. It turns out the merchant is cornered by a couple of goblins, desperately clinging to his only source of light. He waves his torch frantically, warning the monsters that they will get a nasty taste of fire if they advance. The bright flame flickers in the dark, serving as the only thing keeping the swarm at bay for now. Seeing this, the champion realizes that extinguishing that fire is his only desperate path to victory. Our boy watches as the beast shifts its target, realizing the coward is going after the weak link. Without wasting a single second, he reaches for his trusty axe, ready to shut down this pathetic comeback attempt. Kadim stands his ground, noting that the monster's play for the merchant is painfully obvious to him. With a cold glare, he vows that he won't let the creature have its way, no matter how desperate it gets. Kadim stares down the red beast, knowing the trash-tier monster is trying to outmaneuver him. The champion is surprisingly quick, realizing that a direct confrontation with our boy is a death sentence. Kadim's eyes flare with a demonic red glow as he calculates his next move to end this. He tightens his grip on the axe, his muscles bulging with the raw power of a blood berserker. If he can't hit the monster directly, he decides to just delete the ground beneath its feet. With a heavy grunt, he brings the axe down in a devastating arc that splits the air. The Goblin champion is completely dumbfounded, realizing too late that it has nowhere left to run. The blade whistles through the dark, carrying the weight of a player who has seen it all. A massive explosion of rock and dust follows as the floor shatters into a million jagged pieces. The merchant and the remaining goblins freeze in terror, witnessing the sheer destructive force of a true monster. The Goblin champion tumbles through the air as the floor gives way, completely losing its footing. A massive shockwave echoes through the cave, burying the trash-tier monster under a mountain of debris. Our boy doesn't give him a second to breathe, closing the distance like a predator in the dark. The beast desperately claws at its face, cursing the thick dust that has blinded its demonic eyes. Kadim sticks the landing with bone-crushing force, his presence alone heavy enough to still the air. Emerging from the smoke, he looks like a true demon, his eyes burning with absolute murderous intent. Before the goblin can even blink, Kadim's blade carves a brutal path right through its thick skull. The monster shrieks in agony, realizing its rapid evolution was nothing compared to a seasoned player's wrath. Kadim just smirks, mockingly telling the beast that its mangled face actually looks much better this way. Even with a blade in its head, the goblin swears vengeance, but it is already game over. Kadim is genuinely surprised the trash-tier monster is still clinging to life after taking a blade to the skull. Our boy tightens his grip on the hilt, ready to finish this messy job once and for all. He finds the whole situation a massive pain but knows he can't leave any loose ends behind. The Goblin champion wails in pure agony as the cold steel sinks deeper into its demonic brain. With a single, fluid motion, Kadim rips his blade downward, splitting the beast's head wide open. The massive tyrant finally collapses, its reign of terror ending in a pool of its own filth. Its skull shatters completely, proving that no amount of evolution can save it from a pro player. The monster's heavy carcass hits the dirt with a satisfying thud, signaling the end of the hunt. Kadim senses his power peaking, realizing just how close he came to losing his combat edge. He exhales a breath of relief, glad he finished the job before his crucial buff finally expired. Kadim hears the pathetic whimpers of the remaining trash-tier monsters and realizes the tide has completely turned. The surviving goblins are absolutely dumbfounded, trembling as they realize their big boss just got turned into paste. Our boy notes that without their demonic leader, these pests have lost every ounce of their fake courage. He tightens his grip on the blade, knowing that leaving even one alive is a rookie mistake. With a swift, brutal swing, he starts the cleanup, proving these creatures are no match for his strength. Kadim decides that since they've already crossed the line into being monsters, none of them deserve mercy. Another goblin watches in pure horror as its comrade's head rolls across the dirt like a useless pebble. The cave becomes a slaughterhouse as Kadim moves like a shadow, painting the walls with fresh goblin blood. He catches another one trying to scream, silencing it forever with a strike as cold as his gaze. As one survivor tries to bolt, Kadim simply watches, already calculating the most efficient way to end it. Kadim spots a small figure holding a torch and assumes it is just another pest waiting to be squashed. He readies his blade for the final kill, determined to leave no witnesses behind in this dark cave. As he brings the steel down, a frantic scream for mercy suddenly breaks his murderous trance. The merchant shrieks in absolute terror, realizing he is about to be butchered alongside the trash-tier monsters. Our boy's eyes snap wide as he realizes he almost turned his only guide into a human kebab. He manages to freeze the strike, the blood-stained edge hovering just a hair's breadth from the man's skin. The merchant looks up with trembling eyes, wondering if his soul has already left his body. Kadim stands there dumbfounded, his heart racing as he processes how close he came to a massive blunder. He looks genuinely shaken, realizing the bloodlust almost made him lose his only ticket out of these woods. After the merchant asks if he is feeling okay, Kadim finally lowers his weapon and offers a stiff apology. Kadim decides they need to wipe out the remaining trash-tier goblins and get the kids home safely. The merchant immediately agrees, clearly relieved that his terrifying companion is back to being a hero. They trudge out of the cave, Kadim casually dragging a bloodied corpse as if it weighs nothing. The settlement erupts in joy as the villagers realize their children have actually returned from the brink. Parents collapse in relief, clutching their kids tight after a night filled with nothing but pure terror. Even with a massive demon carcass on his back, the villagers see Kadim as their ultimate savior. A weathered mother approaches with a bowl of stew, begging the silent mercenary to accept their hospitality. Our boy just turns it down, insisting the starving children need the nourishment far more than he does. He tells the merchant to go eat his fill while he finds a quiet place to finally rest. As he walks away, the merchant can't help but feel dumbfounded by the barbarian's unexpected streak of kindness. The poor kid looks like his soul has been completely ripped out of his body. The merchant watches in silence, realizing the nightmare hasn't ended just because the monsters are dead. He's absolutely horrified as he hears the twisted nonsense coming from the mouths of these innocent children. Kadim leads him through the cave, where the kids are huddled together, chanting about ruin and death. Our boy explains that these children have been brainwashed since the moment they were snatched from their homes. They've been forced to repeat that their parents abandoned them until they actually started to believe it. The demons drilled into their heads that they are the most useless beings in the entire world. It's a psychological poison so potent that even a seasoned priest would probably snap under the pressure. Kadim points out the cold truth that the parents actually did abandon them to save themselves. The merchant is left sickened by the sheer cruelty of the demon's psychological warfare. Kadim coldly explains that demons aren't just evil, they actually thrive on human suffering and despair. The merchant stands there completely dumbfounded, struggling to process the sheer depravity of the monsters they encountered. He finally realizes why our boy said the children only lived because the demon was exceptionally cunning. Despite the horror, the merchant asks if a parent's sincere love could eventually heal the children's broken spirits. Kadim admits it isn't impossible, though his eyes remain fixed on the harsh reality of their situation. He bluntly doubts that parents who abandon their kids to save themselves even possess that kind of sincerity. The merchant falls into a somber silence, unable to argue against the cold logic of a seasoned warrior. They begin their trek out of the village while the locals watch their grim savior depart without a word. The merchant is absolutely shocked that they are leaving so soon, wondering why they can't just rest. Kadim ignores the plea and prepares to move, knowing imperial witnesses have likely already started singing to the authorities. Kadim warns that while killing trash-tier soldiers is fine, offing a holy night brings heat they can't ignore. The merchant suddenly remembers that our boy actually butchered one of Elga's elite, making them walking targets. Knowing the Empire's dogs are likely already sniffing their trail, Kadim insists they need to move immediately. Meanwhile, Helia arrives at the massacre site, finding the bloated remains of Linton under a sky of crows. She stares down in grim silence, likely disgusted by the incompetence that led to such a pathetic end. This all started because Kadim finished off the evolved goblin, plunging his blade deep into its neck. He twisted the steel, ensuring the beast's demonic essence flowed freely as its life faded away. While the dumbfounded villagers watched, our boy casually harvested the demon's blood like it was a chore. He checked his flask, satisfied that had secured enough emergency fuel to justify the little detour. With a final slash, he discarded the monster's remains, finally ready to leave the trash-tier village behind. A few villagers approach Kadim, wondering what he plans to do with the massive demon corpse. Our boy bluntly tells them he has no use for the trash and orders them to burn it. One greedy villager is dumbfounded, realizing the mountain of gold he is being told to incinerate. He starts plotting to secretly sell the remains to make a quick buck off the hero's work. Kadim shuts that down instantly, warning that the stench of blood will only invite more monsters. He asks if they really want to deal with another goblin raid just for a few coins. Terrified by his cold gaze, the villagers quickly realize their greed isn't worth their lives. They scramble to drag the bloody carcass away, desperate to avoid another nightmare scenario. Just as he is about to leave, a woman calls out to stop him one last time. The villager mother offers a tray of basic supplies, hoping these humble gifts show their genuine gratitude. Kadim accepts the humble gifts, stoically deciding he will put them to good use on his journey. He starts gearing up, pulling on sturdy boots and tightening his belt to prepare for the road ahead. Our boy is finally ready to move out, much to the confusion of the tag-along merchant prisoner. Suddenly, a sharp pang of pain shoots through his chest, catching him completely off guard. He winces in agony, cursing the persistent wound left behind by that damn holy night during their escape. Even with his insane recovery speed, this specific injury refuses to scab over like his other battle scars. He realizes the weapon that pierced him was no ordinary spear, but a blessed tool meant for killing. Meanwhile, crows circle the site of the massacre, where a discarded spear marks the path of his destruction. Helia arrives at the scene, her expression turning cold as she surveys the aftermath of the carnage. When Idan admits they have found zero significant clues, she just sighs and calls his incompetence utterly pathetic. Helia analyzes the scene, noting the prisoners were killed and the gear was left completely untouched. Idan is left scratching his head, wondering what kind of twisted group could commit such a sacrilegious act. She calls him a total imbecile, ordering him to stop staring and start tracking based on her deductions. Helia continues to berate him, pointing out that his lack of intuition is why he's still a paladin. Idan knows she's just as lost as he is, but her overwhelming status makes her impossible to challenge. This woman is a legend who ascended to Arch-Paladin after single-handedly slaughtering 20 high-ranking demons. Her personality might be trash tier, but her reputation as the Empire's youngest elite is definitely well-earned. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but Eden realizes he's nowhere near her level of power. Seeing that traditional investigation is failing, Helia sighs and decides to stop playing by the rules. She demands the holy relic from the Archbishop, prepared to use divine power to track their elusive prey. Idan is absolutely dumbfounded at the mention of the twin mirrors, remembering how the last one shattered. These holy relics are legendary, with one seeing the future and the other reflecting the hidden past. Helia snaps at him, asking if he'd rather explain their failure to the Archbishop personally. She dismisses his fears, confident that only a great demon could ever hope to break such a relic. Reluctantly, the paladin hands over the mirror, knowing there is no turning back from this divine investigation. Helia prepares to activate the artifact, desperate for any clue that will lead them to the killer. The mirror erupts in a blinding light as it begins to pull fragments of history from the air. A massive projection of the past surges forth, revealing the gruesome truth of the convoy's final moments. They watch in horror as our boy drinks demon blood and treats elite soldiers like trash-tier fodder. Helia stands frozen as she witnesses the sheer, unbridled savagery of the monster they are actually hunting. The holy relic suddenly shatters into pieces, unable to contain the sheer malice it just witnessed. Both knights are completely dumbfounded, staring at the shards of what was supposed to be an unbreakable artifact. Idan realizes this means the monster they saw is actually on par with a legendary great demon. Terrified by the revelation, he insists they retreat to the capital to warn the higher-ups immediately. Helia just smirks, asking why they would run now that their target has finally been identified. She declares that the hunt continues, leaving her subordinate shaking in his boots at her reckless determination. Her hand tightens around her blade, fueled by a mix of holy duty and pure, competitive arrogance. She draws her sword, radiating a cold intensity that proves she is not just any ordinary knight. Helia vows to personally slaughter the fiend, convinced she is the only one capable of putting him down. The merchant prisoner crouches by the river, his mind heavy with the weight of everything he's seen. He can't help but think of his young son and the children they just saved from those monsters. Shaking his head, he tries to snap out of his spiral before the barbarian loses his patience. He fills his jug, knowing he has to stay useful if he wants to survive this journey home. Returning to camp, the merchant is surprised to see our boy already lying down by the fire. He offers to prepare a meal but quickly realizes something is seriously wrong with his captor. The merchant freezes in shock, his heart racing as he looks at the man who slaughtered a champion. Kadim is curled up and sweating, his massive body racked with a sudden, violent shivering. The merchant panics, wondering why a man who shreds demons is suddenly suffering from such a deep wound. The merchant is absolutely dumbfounded, seeing a nasty, glowing wound suddenly rip open across our boy's chest. Kadim grits his teeth, realizing he was a total idiot for underestimating that holy weapon from earlier. It turns out that spear was imbued with a nasty blessing specifically designed to shred through demonic entities. Since he fuels his power by chugging demon blood, his body is now reacting like trash-tier monster meat. The merchant panics and suggests they should have rested, but Kadim knows a simple nap won't heal holy burns. He urgently asks about the moon's phase, and the merchant confirms it was a thin, waning crescent yesterday. Kadim feels a surge of relief, knowing he still has a shot at whatever he is planning for tonight. Suddenly, a haunting howl echoes through the dark woods, making both of them freeze in their tracks. They both whip their heads around, wondering if the Empire or something even worse is finally closing in. A dozen pairs of glowing eyes pierce the darkness, as the forest suddenly feels a lot more crowded. A massive, clawed paw thuds onto the dirt, signaling that whatever is hunting them isn't just some common beast. The merchant's heart sinks as he recognizes them as blade wolves, a pack of predators known for their relentless hunger. Kadim exhales sharply, his body still screaming from the holy wound while he tries to keep his focus steady. Despite the agony, our boy reaches for his trusty axe and sword, ready to paint the forest floor red. He orders the merchant to stay back, even as the guy worries that Kadim is in no condition to fight. Kadim curses his luck, feeling like this world is hell-bent on never giving him a single moment of peace. The pack of mutts closes in, surrounding our boy who is clearly not in the mood for their games. He readies his weapons, wishing these pests had picked a much better time to drop by for a visit. The blade wolves snarl, their predatory instincts screaming that our boy is finally ripe for the picking. Kadim huffs, his vision swimming as the holy wound continues to sap every ounce of his legendary strength. He stands his ground before the cowering merchant, knowing he is the only thing stopping a total massacre. One beast loses its patience and lunges, its jaws snapping for a taste of barbarian flesh. Our boy doesn't hesitate, swinging his heavy axe in a desperate arc to intercept the incoming strike. The blade bites deep into the wolf's neck, sending a crimson spray across the dark forest floor. The force of the blow sends the mangled creature tumbling back, but the victory feels incredibly heavy. Kadim curses his blurring vision, realizing he missed the precise killing blow he was originally aiming for. The rest of the pack senses his weakness and charges in, hoping to finally overwhelm the wounded warrior. He draws his sword, grit teeth being the only thing keeping him upright against the rising tide. Kadim swings his blade, trying to keep the pack at bay despite his failing strength. He carves through another beast, but the sheer numbers are starting to become a real problem. Suddenly, a wolf finds an opening and sinks its teeth deep into our boy's forearm. He grunts in pain, realizing that these trash-tier predators are actually starting to draw blood. With a surge of raw power, he slams his fist into the creature's snout to break its hold. His vision narrows as the bloodlust begins to take over, pushing past the agony of his holy wound. He grabs a lunging wolf mid-air and prepares to show it why you don't mess with a barbarian. Another beast latches onto his leg, desperate to drag the titan down to the forest floor. Kadim clicks his tongue in annoyance, frustrated that he's being slowed down by such mindless animals. He delivers a brutal finishing blow, painting the trees red as he fights to survive the night. Kadim catches his breath, standing amidst a pile of mangled fur and bone as the night grows colder. The remaining blade wolves aren't backing down, instead regrouping for another coordinated strike against our boy. He realizes his current body is a wreck, and won't last much longer against this endless trash-tier swarm. Suddenly, a frantic scream cuts through the growls, catching the barbarian completely off guard. Turns out the merchant is still alive, desperately waving torches to keep the hungry predators at bay. Knowing he's at his limit, Kadim pops a vial, even though he knows it's basically drinking liquid poison. The wolves lunge forward again, but this time they're met with a terrifying, blood-red mist. As the beasts close in, the air grows heavy with a familiar, suffocating pressure from the barbarian's awakening. His eyes flare with a murderous red light as the bloodlust finally takes full control of his senses. With his agility enhanced, he becomes a blur of steel, shredding through the pack in a single, fluid motion. Kadim recalls how annoying that fast demon was, realizing the blood's effect is exactly what he needed. The trash-tier wolves suddenly scramble back, but they aren't retreating out of fear of our boy. The merchant is dumbfounded, shouting that the beasts are running away as he grips his torch. Kadim knows better, sensing that the predators aren't fleeing, but rather making room for something much worse. A massive, blade-covered paw slams into the dirt with enough force to shake the very ground. Our boy stands his ground as a suffocating pressure fills the air, dwarfing the previous small fry. A monstrous wolf with glowing eyes lets out a guttural growl, revealing its status as the true apex. The merchant freezes in terror as the beast, twice the size of the others, looms over him. Kadim grits his teeth, immediately recognizing this beast as the pack leader he has to put down. Things take a turn for the worse when he realizes his temporary power-up is finally reaching its limit. The alpha lunges with terrifying speed, forcing our boy to block a strike that feels like a falling mountain. Kadim wonders if this beast is actually trying to crush him under the sheer weight of its massive frame. His eyes flare red as he realizes his body is reaching its absolute limit against this apex predator. Suddenly, his defense falters and he coughs up blood as his internal injuries finally catch up to him. Kadim collapses to the dirt, his holy wound burning like hellfire, while the merchant watches in pure horror. The merchant starts screaming for him to get up, realizing they are both about to become wolf chow. He begs the barbarian to snap out of it because the massive beast is already closing in for the kill. Our boy gasps for air, desperately clutching his chest as the divine energy continues to ravage his insides. The alpha lets out a bone-chilling growl, looming over them with the intent to finish this hunt right now. Instead of fighting, Kadim looks toward the sky, questioning why the system's conditions haven't been met yet. Kadim suddenly feels a shift, realizing the specific timing he was waiting for has finally arrived. His eyes flare with a golden light as he senses the system's hidden conditions finally being met. It is officially midnight, on a moonless night, the exact moment required to trigger his dormant power. He slams his blade into the earth, the impact echoing through the silent, blood-soaked forest. Our boy begins a solemn prayer to Atala, the legendary master of soldiers, seeking his divine strength. The merchant watches in utter confusion as the barbarian kneels amidst the carnage, ignoring the approaching predators. He vows to bestow a blood-soaked name upon his weapon, dedicating his coming slaughter to the ancient warrior. A blinding light erupts from his body, forcing both the merchant and the beasts to recoil in shock. Even the alpha wolf is left dumbfounded, its predatory instincts screaming that the prey has become the hunter. The merchant can only scream in terror, unable to comprehend the ritual unfolding before his very eyes. Kadim kneels as a pillar of spiritual fire erupts, signaling the start of a legendary weapon's birth. The system's prompt hangs in the air, asking our boy what title he intends to grant the blade. He feels a familiar vibration in his soul, a sensation he hasn't experienced since his very first playthrough. With a sharp glint in his eye, he decides to name the weapon Mosquito, a truly trash-tier choice. The air grows heavy with mana as the ritual binds his will to the cold, blood-stained steel. Suddenly, a crimson sigil begins to etch itself onto the metal, reacting to his bizarre naming sense. The mark of the bloodsucker glows bright, finalizing the contract between the barbarian and his new partner. This triggers his unique trait, proving that he is the only one capable of bestowing names upon gear. As the flames reach their peak, the surrounding forest trembles under the weight of his newly awakened authority. The ritual concludes, cementing the legacy of a blade that will soon feast on plenty of imperial blood. With a cold gaze, our boy officially names his blade Mosquito, choosing a truly trash-tier title for his weapon. As he grips the hilt, a surge of primal energy erupts, signaling that the naming ritual is finally complete. A jagged crimson sigil burns into the steel, marking the birth of a weapon that hungers for life. One of the blade wolves lunges forward with a deafening howl, sensing the sudden shift in the barbarian's aura. Watching from the sidelines, the merchant prisoner is completely dumbfounded, wondering what kind of monster he's actually following. Kadim doesn't miss a beat, swinging his newly named partner to tear through the beast's thick, matted fur. Another predator tries to close the distance, but our boy is already moving, anticipating every single predatory instinct. Suddenly, the blade's special effect, Vampirism, kicks in, drawing the warm essence of the wolf into the metal. He feels a wave of relief as his holy wound partially closes, realizing he might actually survive this night. The wounded wolf can only wheeze in pain, realizing too late that it's no longer the hunter in this forest. Our boy isn't finished yet, taunting the remaining beasts to step up for another round of absolute carnage. He doesn't wait for an answer, immediately burying his blade into the skull of the nearest predator. As the steel bites deep, a sinister red glow erupts, signaling the activation of his new weapon's power. Standing amidst the carnage, Kadim grips the hilt tight as the sword begins to feast on the blood. System alerts flash before him, confirming that his vitality is surging back into his previously battered body. He is genuinely impressed that even that pesky holy wound from the Empire's relic has finally vanished. Surveying the graveyard of fur and bone, he realizes these wolves were actually a blessing in disguise. He examines the ancient script, noting that this vampirism effect is the only reason he is still standing. Still, he knows the weapon's low grade means he will need a mountain of corpses to stay healthy. Taking a moment to breathe, he decides that this small victory is enough to keep him moving forward. Kadim realizes that granting special effects without materials is a massive advantage for his survival. He reminds himself not to get greedy, as his past life taught him that expecting too much leads to ruin. Meanwhile, the merchant peeks out from his hiding spot, wondering if the bloodbath has finally reached its end. He cautiously steps over the wolf carcasses, amazed that a man who looked like a wreck pulled off a massacre. Approaching our boy, the merchant is dumbfounded to see every single wound, even the holy one, has completely vanished. Kadim turns his cold gaze on the man, questioning why on earth he didn't just take off into the night. The merchant just stands there looking like a deer in headlights, completely failing to process the simple question. Kadim points out the obvious fact that he was too weak to give chase if the man had just bolted. It takes a few seconds for the gears to turn as the merchant starts doing the math in his head. Suddenly, the realization hits him like a truck, and he lets out a scream of pure regret for being slow. Kadim catches the merchant still entertaining thoughts of escape, but the poor guy quickly denies everything out of fear. The merchant starts kicking himself, wondering if he was too distracted by the barbarian's wounds to actually bolt. Our boy decides it's time for a nap and orders the merchant to stay awake and keep watch. He adds a terrifying warning, promising to turn the merchant's own guts into a rope if he disappears. Shaking like a leaf, the merchant realizes that a barbarian like him definitely isn't just making idle threats. He spends the entire night sobbing by the fire, far too terrified to even think about closing his eyes. When morning finally rolls around, the merchant looks like absolute trash after his sleepless night of pure terror. They get back to business as the merchant explains it'll take 10 days to reach the border via map. Kadim makes it clear that he's had enough of holy nights and wants to avoid them at all costs. The merchant reassures him they're in the sticks, though trash-tier bandits might still try their luck along the way. The merchant realizes that trash-tier bandits won't even be a speed bump for a powerhouse like our boy. He suggests hitting up Multana for supplies, since the church's annoying influence hasn't reached that remote spot yet. Pointing at the map, he explains that the Golden Road is their ticket to reaching Vestana in record time. Kadim reflects on the long journey ahead, knowing it's still a massive improvement over the brutal old days. Centuries ago, the continent was a blood-soaked arena where petty kingdoms constantly slaughtered each other for scraps. Back then, outsiders were treated with pure hostility, especially a massive barbarian who looked like a walking riot. Even Melissa, his future ally, looked at him like he was a common insect during their first meeting. As a sheltered scholar, she was convinced he was either a slave trader's lackey or a dangerous hybrid. Our boy just smirks at the useless memory, amused by how much his life has changed since then. The merchant reassures him that the modern alliance is far less wary of guys who look like him. The merchant hears a loud commotion up ahead and wonders what kind of nonsense is happening now. Further down the path, a group of sketchy individuals are busy shouting and arguing over something trivial. Our boy asks his guide for a quick assessment, wanting to know what this scene looks like. The merchant identifies them as trash-tier bandits, who seem to be having some internal dispute among themselves. Realizing nothing good comes from meddling with losers, Kadim decides it is best to just take another path. Unfortunately, the bandits spot them and start pointing, realizing they have been watched this whole time. Our boy finds the whole situation incredibly annoying since he just wanted a peaceful trip to the border. The thugs do not hesitate and start charging toward them, thinking they have found some easy targets. They draw their weapons with a sharp shink, clearly eager to spill some blood for a few coins. Kadim stands his ground and readies his blade, fully prepared to show these idiots the true meaning of power. Kadim stares them down, wondering why these idiots are making so much noise during his supposed peaceful trip. One of the hooded trash-tier bandits lets out a victory cry as if they just won the lottery. He starts clapping his hands together, celebrating an arrival he clearly thinks is his ultimate salvation. Our boy is completely dumbfounded as the bandits cheer, claiming he is some legendary warrior they expected. The opposing group of losers immediately bolts, terrified that a powerhouse has joined the fray to crush them. The thugs laugh hysterically, telling the fleeing rats to inform their boss that the raging horn has arrived. Kadim finally loses his patience and demands to know what kind of nonsense they are pulling right now. The hooded man quickly apologizes, asking if he should address him by his fearsome mercenary title instead. With a heavy sigh, our boy clarifies he isn't their hero and tells them to move or die. The bandits stand there frozen and dumbfounded, unable to process that their savior is just a grumpy stranger. The thugs stand there in stunned silence, their brains short-circuiting after realizing they've been cheering for the wrong guy. Suddenly, the hooded trash-tier bandit draws his blade, his previous admiration turning into instant hostility. He starts screaming, calling our boy a good-for-nothing bastard for popping up out of nowhere and causing confusion. Kadim just stares back with cold eyes, while the merchant behind him begins to tremble in pure terror. The entire group of thugs surrounds our boy, pointing their weapons and demanding he takes responsibility for this mess. Kadim notes how quickly their tune changed, wondering if they actually think their numbers give them an advantage. One bald thug spots the merchant hiding in the back, his eyes lighting up at the massive bag. He ignores Kadim and reaches out, ordering the terrified porter to bring that expensive-looking loot over right now. The bandit keeps taunting the poor guy, promising he won't bite as long as he hands over the goods. Before he can touch the merchant, Kadim steps in, blocking the path with his massive, scarred frame. The bald thug complains that our boy's sudden appearance ruined their plans and demands some cold hard cash. Kadim just stands there in silence, clearly not bothered by these trash-tier threats or their ridiculous demands. Seeing that he won't get any money, the scarred bandit smirks and proposes a different kind of deal. He suggests Kadim acts as their muscle, pretending to be a legendary barbarian to scare off any potential threats. The thug even demonstrates how to flex and shout, thinking this dumb plan will actually work on our boy. He claims they will forget about the bag if he takes responsibility like a real man, and joins them. When Kadim stays quiet, the bandit gets bold, mockingly asking if he is actually a woman under those muscles. The rest of the gang bursts out laughing, convinced that our boy is simply too terrified to even speak. The merchant watches from the back, terrified that Kadim's patience is only making these idiots act even more reckless. Finally, the leader taps Kadim's chest, declaring the deal is done without realizing he is playing with a monster. Kadim looks down, his patience finally hitting rock bottom with these trash-tier idiots. The scarred thug thinks they're buddies now, casually asking for our boy's name like they're equals. Kadim decides he'll gladly share his identity, but only after he clears some space first. In a flash of steel, he answers by sending the leader's head flying before anyone can blink. The thug's head rolls across the dirt, his smug expression frozen in a permanent state of confusion. The rest of the gang stands there dumbfounded, unable to process how their boss just got deleted. One of the goons finally snaps and lets out a pathetic shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. The merchant just sighs, knowing full well that Kadim isn't the type to tolerate such blatant disrespect. Even though they're shaking, the remaining thugs draw their rusted blades, foolishly thinking they still have a chance. Standing over the corpse, Kadim calmly reveals his name, letting the weight of his presence sink in. Kadim introduces himself as the Great Warrior of Atala, a title that commands immediate respect. A peaceful butterfly rests on what looks like a simple wooden post in the forest. But this isn't just wood, it's the handle of a tool meant for much more violent work. Our boy grips the handle, scaring off the insect as he prepares to finish the job. He effortlessly splits a trash-tier thug's skull, proving even a basic tool is lethal in his hands. Kadim pauses to inspect the weapon, noticing it starting to fail after such a brutal display. The edge is chipped and the joint is rattling, clearly not built for this level of carnage. He decides he needs a real weapon soon, and tucks the broken axe back into his belt. The last surviving bandit is completely dumbfounded, his body shaking as he realizes he's next. The hooded goon stammers out the names of his fallen friends, wondering if they're all really dead. Kadim locks eyes with the last survivor, his gaze heavy with a silent, lethal promise. The hooded trash-tier thug panics, his survival instincts finally kicking in as he tries to scramble away. Fear makes him clumsy, and he faceplants into the dirt while desperately trying to escape our boy. Kadim steps forward, noting the coward won't need to worry about his ankles or his axe anymore. He looms over the bandit, threatening a crushed spine if he doesn't start spilling every bit of information. Our boy demands to know who this Agon's Raging Horn is, and how these losers are connected. The thug is too paralyzed by terror to speak, his mind completely blank under Kadim's intense pressure. The merchant chimes in, explaining that Agon is a major hub within the Free Cities Alliance. It turns out Agon's Raging Horn is a legendary barbarian champion who dominates the continent's largest arena. Kadim finally puts the pieces together, realizing these idiots actually mistook him for that famous powerhouse. The merchant points out that Agon's Raging Horn is way too high tier to visit a dump like this. Desperate to survive, the thug insists his boss and the legend are actually best friends from the arena. He grovels in the dirt, barking about how they're all dead meat once the champion finally arrives. Even while pinned, the trash-tier bandit tries to act tough, claiming the legend will drop everything to help. He explains that his Blood Cave gang only got pushed out because the Black Hammer bastards used numbers. The merchant just sighs, telling the poor idiot that he's clearly been scammed by his own boss. He reasons that a true friend would have just given him gold instead of letting him rot as a bandit. The realization hits the thug like a truck, leaving him completely dumbfounded by his own gullibility. As the bandit's world crumbles, our boy stands tall, realizing the gang boss is just a lying coward. Kadim decides it's better to strike first and wipe them out before they can even think of an ambush. Kadim figures that since they're just trash-tier bandits, he can loot their supplies without a single shred of guilt. He stares down the survivor, demanding to be led straight to their hideout to finish the job. The thug tries to hesitate, but he quickly realizes that saying no isn't an option with this monster. Our boy applies a little pressure with his boot, making sure the message is loud and clear. The bandit finally breaks and starts screaming for mercy as Kadim drags him toward the gang's secret lair. They eventually reach the Blood Cave gang's hideout, where a couple of guards are lazily keeping watch. Deep inside the damp cavern, the leader sits on a makeshift throne, acting like he actually owns the place. This guy looks like he's seen a few scraps, but his arrogant posture suggests he's way overconfident. He introduces himself as Graham, claiming he's basically brothers with the legendary champion, Agon's Raging Horn. Graham starts barking about his supposed glory days as a proud gladiator, completely unaware of the storm approaching. Graham panics as he realizes his pathetic record as a mediocre gladiator won't save him from this mess. He deeply regrets lying about the messenger, knowing the legendary champion would never actually bother showing up here. Staring into the gloom, he desperately wonders where his life of simple banditry went so horribly wrong. He misses the days of just scraping by with his loyal, albeit trash tier, crew of local thugs and bandits. His anger flares toward the rival gang that pushed him into making such a dangerous and high-stakes bluff. Just as he prays for a miracle, a frantic guard sprints into the cave, sounding completely unhinged and terrified. The guard screams that the legendary Aegon's raging horn is finally here, but his face tells a different story. He begs for salvation, looking like he has already seen the face of death itself lurking in the tunnels. Graham stands there dumbfounded, his brain short-circuiting as the sudden sound of a heavy thud echoes nearby. Our boy emerges from the darkness, having already turned the messenger into a bloody and silent human ornament. Graham's heart skips a beat as he stares at the terrifying figure emerging from the shadows. He notes the distinctive barbarian gear and a physique that looks like it was carved from granite. Seeing the blood-soaked axe, he desperately hopes this is the legendary warrior he was bluffing about. Our boy just stares him down, casually asking if this pathetic man is the one in charge. Graham is completely speechless, his mind racing to figure out who this monster actually is. He looks up from his throne, feeling the overwhelming pressure of a true predator entering his den. Kadim stands there like a god of death, radiating an aura of absolute, unadulterated slaughter. Graham realizes this isn't the legend he expected, making his previous bluff feel like a death sentence. Looking at his butchered men, he knows his trash-tier gang never stood a single chance. Regardless of his name, Graham knows he is staring into the eyes of a truly dangerous bastard. Graham slams his fist down, deciding he can't just sit there and wait for his inevitable end. He decides to strike first, hoping a preemptive blow might actually give him a fighting chance. Our boy finds it amusing that this trash-tier leader thinks he can win with his bare hands. Graham channels every ounce of his desperation, his eyes glowing as he prepares a final, pathetic charge. Kadim barely flinches, simply observing the clumsy movement, as if it were a slow-motion joke. Before the bandit leader can even land a hit, he is sent reeling by a blindingly fast strike. Suddenly, the tough guy act vanishes as Graham drops to his knees, begging for mercy like a coward. Kadim stares him down with pure disgust, telling the man to never call him Big Brother again. The merchant watches from the side, realizing this pathetic display is exactly how he survived earlier. Graham's heart sinks when he sees the sword rising, realizing his begging failed to buy him any safety. Graham scrambles for his life, offering a recurring tribute if our boy just puts the sword down. He realizes Kadim isn't the listening type, cursing his luck for dying so pathetically after surviving the arena. Suddenly, a spark of desperation hits him as he notices something that might actually save his neck. His eyes lock onto a blood-stained tool, realizing he has one last card left to play. The coward pivots instantly, shouting about a treasure map to keep the blade from his throat. He claims the map leads straight to a legendary dwarven throwing axe, hoping greed outweighs bloodlust. Kadim pauses, the mention of dwarven craftsmanship actually making him reconsider the immediate execution. Graham doubles down, explaining that these weapons are forged with the literal heart and soul of master artisans. Seeing the opening, Kadim demands more details, giving the trash-tier leader a temporary lease on life. Graham breathes a sigh of relief, knowing that even a monster like Kadim can't ignore black-market dwarven gear. Graham hypes up the legendary axe, claiming it never dulls and homes in on targets like a bird. Kadim knows dwarven gear is on a whole different level compared to the trash-tier human equipment he's used. He recalls that, while other races exist, they usually keep to themselves in the most remote corners. Getting a dwarf to actually trade is nearly impossible, since they pretty much despise every human they meet. Our boy realizes he needs a top-tier weapon soon, so he doesn't have to keep burning demon blood. Kadim coldly demands the map, but the bandit starts hesitating, realizing he's losing his only leverage. Graham tries to play hardball, insisting on a guarantee for his life before handing over the goods. Kadim finds it hilarious that a bottom feeder thinks he's in any position to negotiate with a monster. Without a second thought, the blade whistles through the air with a deadly, sharp sound. Graham is left dumbfounded as the cold steel pierces his chest, ending his pathetic attempt at a deal. Kadim makes it clear that if it's a negotiation Graham wants, he has his own brutal methods. Our boy coldly promises to keep carving holes into the bandit until he finally decides to start talking. Graham can only tremble in absolute terror as the reality of his agonizing situation finally sinks in. Meanwhile, over at the Black Hammer Gang hideout, the atmosphere is thick with tension and frantic disbelief. A pair of trash-tier thugs argue desperately, trying to convince their leader that what they saw was real. A massive hammer slams into the floor, silencing the bickering underlings with a single, heavy thud. Creven, the boss of the Black Hammer Gang, looms over them, clearly unimpressed by their panicked reports. He finds it hard to believe that a legend like Aegon's raging horn would ever help bottom feeders. The subordinates can only stutter in fear, desperately swearing that their report about the legendary warrior is true. Kreven stares them down, questioning if such a ridiculous story could even possibly make sense to him. The trash-tier thugs beg Kreven to believe them, swearing they saw a barbarian as massive as a bear. Kreven ponders the rumors of Graham being tight with Aegon's raging horn, wondering if there's any truth to it. He quickly dismisses it as nonsense, assuming Graham just hired some random mercenary to bluff his way through. Still, a small part of him can't help but worry about the consequences if that legend actually showed up. Suddenly, another subordinate bursts in, frantically reporting that the Blood Cave gang is launching a raid right now. When Kreven demands to know their numbers, he's stunned to hear there are only 2 attackers approaching. The messenger trembles as he confirms the second person is indeed that terrifyingly massive barbarian from the stories. The rest of the gang is dumbfounded, unable to believe someone would dare raid them with such small numbers. Kreven's expression hardens as the reality of the situation sets in, realizing the rumors might actually be true. He knows deep down that if they're facing a legend, they won't stand a single chance in a head-on fight. Kreven orders his men to set up an ambush, positioning crossbowmen for a lethal trap behind the barricades. He grips his massive hammer tight, ready to crush anyone foolish enough to challenge his gang's authority. Our boy decides it is time to personally verify if this intruder is actually the legendary champion. If the rumors are true, Kreven knows he is in for the fight of his life tonight. Meanwhile, Kadim and his terrified guide trek through the dark woods, nearing the heart of the enemy's lair. The merchant starts sweating bullets, questioning if they should really charge headfirst into a den of killers. Kadim shoots him a cold look, demanding to know if the story about the map was just trash-tier lies. Terrified, the merchant stammers that they only lost the territory recently, and the map is definitely still there. He tries to talk sense into the barbarian, worried that walking in so openly is a death sentence. He claims there are 100 thugs inside, desperately hoping Kadim will get cold feet and retreat. Kadim admits 100 thugs is a decent number, while Graham desperately suggests hiring some mercenaries instead. Our boy just wants to finish the job before sunset, even if killing them all is a bit tiring. Graham is completely dumbfounded by Kadim's casual attitude towards slaughtering an entire army of killers. They finally arrive at the heart of the lair, coming face to face with the massive gang leader. A heavy silence fills the air as the 2 powerhouses, clearly cut from the same cloth, size each other up. Kreven demands to know why Graham has returned to his territory with such a dangerous-looking stranger. Seeing his chance, Graham boldly declares that tonight marks the absolute downfall of the Black Hammer gang. He introduces Kadim as the legendary Agon's raging horn, leaving our boy wondering who that even is. The thugs are visibly shaken, terrified that they are actually facing a warrior of such mythic proportions. It turns out Graham is just using this trash-tier bluff to create a distraction for his own escape. Kadim immediately grabs Graham by the hair, demanding to know what kind of trash-tier game he is playing. Our boy shouts that he is not some legendary champion and just wants his item without unnecessary trouble. He stares the boss down, making it clear that shedding blood is not his priority if they just cooperate. Kreven just smirks, feeling smug because he suspected the whole legendary warrior story was a total load of bull. Kadim doubles down on his denial, hoping to de-escalate the situation before things get messy with the gang. He repeats his offer of peace, knowing his real power would turn this cave into a literal graveyard. Kreven assumes Kadim is just a mercenary who realized Graham dragged him into a suicidal death trap. However, he can't help but wonder why this stranger remains so eerily calm, despite being surrounded by killers. To test his mettle, the boss slams his massive stone hammer down, letting the heavy weight do the talking. At the same time, the thugs ready their crossbows, prepared to turn our boy into a human pincushion. The thugs exchange looks, thinking they've finally cornered a big fish worth a massive payday. Surrounded by trash-tier goons, our boy remains unfazed while the merchant shakes like a leaf. Kreven decides to play along, mockingly asking what a powerhouse like him is actually hunting for. Kadim bluntly states he's just after a map, and tells the gang to simply clear the way. The boss' expression shifts instantly as he realizes they are both chasing the exact same treasure. He pulls out a weathered parchment, asking if this is the prize our boy is looking for. The merchant is completely dumbfounded, wondering how the boss managed to snag Graham's hidden insurance policy. Turns out, one of Kreven's lackeys found the map under a rock, where Graham tried to hide it. The boss realizes this map is a magnet for trouble, meaning whatever it leads to is priceless. Kadim's eyes sharpen as he realizes the peaceful route just flew right out the window. Kreven lets out a maniacal laugh as he begins to shred the only lead Kadim has. The merchant is absolutely horrified, watching the trash-tier boss destroy the map right in front of our boy. Instead of just tearing it, the madman starts shoving the parchment into his mouth like a snack. He forces the whole thing down his throat, leaving the merchant completely dumbfounded by such a reckless move. With a satisfied burp, Krivon pats his gut and mockingly challenges the barbarian to retrieve the map. He thinks he's won, laughing because he believes Kadim won't risk killing the only container. Kadim doesn't even flinch, coldly stating that he'll gladly give the boss the fight he's looking for. Our boy realizes he just needs to be fast enough to retrieve it before it's fully digested. Sensing the killing intent, Krivon panics and screams for his men to open fire immediately. One of the thugs pulls the trigger, sending a crossbow bolt whistling through the air toward Kadim. Kadim's eyes narrow as he locks onto his next move with cold, calculated precision. Before the merchant can even process the danger, our boy snatches him by the throat like a rag doll. The poor guy barely manages to let out a confused cry as he is hoisted into the air. A volley of crossbow bolts whistles through the air, aimed straight for the barbarian's chest. With a series of wet thuds, the bolts bury themselves deep into the merchant's back instead. Krivon is absolutely dumbfounded, unable to believe that anyone would be this cold-blooded toward their own guide. While the merchant screams in agony, Kadim remains stone-faced, letting the meat shield soak up every lethal projectile. The gang leader realizes he is dealing with a total lunatic who does not care about collateral damage. Panicking, Krivon bellows for his men to aim for the gaps and fire again immediately. The trash-tier thugs frantically crank their crossbows, desperate to reload before the monster closes the distance. Kadim hurls his axe with enough force to turn the air into a lethal, spinning whistle. One of the trash-tier thugs freezes in place as he sees the heavy blade closing the distance. The axe finds its mark, burying itself deep into the man's neck with a sickening, wet crunch. Blood sprays everywhere as the impact sends the bandit's lifeless body tumbling backward into the dirt. Our boy doesn't even blink, already planning his next move while keeping a firm grip on his shield. The remaining archers panic and shout for everyone to take cover before another blade comes flying. Meanwhile, the poor merchant is turned into a human pincushion as more bolts sink into his flesh. Another projectile pierces his hand, adding a fresh wave of agony to his already broken, bleeding body. The merchant finally breaks, pleading for a quick death instead of being used as a living barrier. Krivon realizes they are just killing their own leverage and bellows for his men to cease fire. Krivon finally loses his cool and orders every last man to charge the barbarian at once. Our boy stands his ground, still using the half-dead merchant as a shield against the incoming mob. He catches a trash-tier thug by the throat, ready to show them why he's the real deal. Instead of retreating, he tosses the merchant's broken body into the crowd to create a momentary opening. He downs a mosquito potion, knowing he needs to stay in peak condition for the upcoming slaughter. With his eyes glowing a deep crimson, he decides it's time to end this little skirmish decisively. Krivon watches in total shock, wondering if his opponent just drank alcohol or some kind of drug. The elation of the potion surges through him, feeling far more potent now that he's healthy. He tightens his grip on his blade and takes a heavy, deliberate step toward the remaining bandits. His gaze is cold and predatory, signaling that the real massacre is only just beginning. The thugs charge in, thinking our boy is just some trash-tier boss they can easily overwhelm. Their confidence turns to pure terror when the barbarian suddenly vanishes right before their eyes. Before they can even blink, a horizontal slash tears through the front line in a spray of crimson. Two heads fly into the air as the bandits realize they aren't dealing with a human anymore. The demon blood buff kicks in, sending a surge of raw, unholy power through his entire body. Our boy becomes a whirlwind of death, his red eyes tracking every pathetic movement the gang makes. With his agility enhanced to a supernatural degree, the thugs can't even process the next strike. His blade hums through the air, leaving nothing but a trail of blood and shattered steel behind. He carves through the mob like a hot knife through butter, systematically erasing every threat in his path. Krivon stands frozen in the back, watching his entire crew get dismantled by a literal monster. Krivon is completely dumbfounded, wondering how a mere barbarian could possibly wield such high-tier divine power. Looking at our boy, he realizes he isn't fighting a man, but a literal monster, born for slaughter. He gulps in pure terror, feeling the weight of his impending doom as the carnage continues. Desperate to survive, he barks orders at his crossbowmen to bring him a loaded weapon immediately. He grips the heavy crossbow, knowing this might be his only chance to stop the rampaging beast. Krivon calculates that no matter how fast Kadim is, he must eventually stop to pick a new target. From his vantage point, he watches the battlefield turn into a graveyard while waiting for the perfect opening. As Kadim turns his back to find another victim, he leaves himself momentarily exposed to a long-range strike. Thinking he finally has the upper hand, Krivon decides that this is the moment to end it all. He pulls the trigger, sending a heavy bolt whistling through the air toward our boy's back. Kadim senses the vibration in the air, turning just in time to face the incoming projectile. Our boy doesn't even flinch, his supernatural senses picking up the bolt's path before it even arrives. Krivon watches with a twisted grin, certain that this sneak attack will finally put the beast down. The heavy iron bolt streaks across the battlefield, aimed directly for a gap in his guard. Despite the danger, Kadim remains stone-faced as he prepares to deal with the annoying nuisance. The gang leader is already celebrating, thinking he just secured his survival with a single lucky shot. With a predatory gaze, Kadim tracks the projectile's movement as it nears his throat with lethal speed. Krevin's smug expression instantly shatters into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as he realizes his mistake. Our boy simply reaches out and snatches the bolt, blood trickling from his palm as he grips it. He stares back with murderous intent, proving that such trash-tier tactics are utterly useless against a true monster. Krivin is completely dumbfounded, unable to process how a mere human could catch a lethal bolt mid-air. With a heavy thud, our boy takes a step forward, his presence alone crushing the gang's remaining morale. Kadim stands like a god of death, his red aura flaring as he prepares to end this trash-tier mob. Realizing the danger, the boss frantically orders his men to bring every loaded crossbow they have left. The thugs are shaking in their boots, knowing that charging this monster is essentially a suicide mission. Suddenly, a blinding flash of steel cuts through the air, signaling the start of a total massacre. He tears through the front line like wet paper, painting the ground red with his enemy's blood. Our boy's eyes glow with a predatory hunger, proving he's far beyond anything these crooks can handle. Krivin panics, realizing his ranged support only succeeded in making the monster prioritize their immediate execution. When he asks about their remaining ammo, the grim realization hits that they only have 3 shots left. Krivin screams at his men to pay attention, his face twisted in a desperate, sweating rage. He reaches for his last resort, gripping the handle of his heavy weapon with white-knuckled intensity. The massive stone hammer thuds against the dirt, a heavy tool meant for crushing skulls. With a roar, the gang leader swings the slab of rock, hoping sheer weight can stop the monster. But our boy just steps forward, his boots cracking the earth as his bloodthirsty aura flares up. Kadim moves like a red blur, his supernatural speed making the heavy hammer look like a toy. Krivin realizes that with his fodder guards gone, he's far too slow to even touch this beast. Panic sets in as he glances around, desperately searching for any way to survive the coming strike. He looks at the empty crossbow on the ground, realizing his ranged support has completely failed him. Now it's just him and the blood berserker, who stands ready to deliver a final, lethal lesson. Krivin roars in a desperate attempt to finally crush our boy with his massive stone hammer. The heavy slab of rock slams into the earth, but Kadim effortlessly avoids the trash-tier strike. Our boy barely flinches at the shockwave, realizing the ground beneath him is the only thing taking damage. Realizing he is outmatched, the gang leader screams for his hidden archers to open fire immediately. The thugs let loose a volley of bolts, hoping a surprise ranged attack can finally bring him down. Kadim just sighs internally, feeling completely unimpressed by these predictable and petty tricks. Krivin watches with bated breath, praying that his men can finish what his hammer could not. A single bolt streaks through the air, aimed right for the blood berserker's head. With supernatural reflexes, Kadim snatches the projectile out of the sky like it is nothing. He stares them down with cold eyes, leaving the thugs completely dumbfounded by his overwhelming speed. Krivin fires his crossbow at point-blank range, certain that a frontal assault will finally end this. He laughs with arrogant confidence, taunting that there is absolutely nothing his target can do now. The bolt strikes Kadim right in the back, yet he stands tall as if it were a toothpick. Our boy's eyes flare with a murderous red light, signaling that the time for games is officially over. The gang leader's smug grin vanishes, replaced by a look of sheer horror as his trump card fails. In a blur of motion, Kadim appears behind him, unleashing a strike that sends blood spraying everywhere. Krivin chokes on his own breath, his body failing him as the reality of his situation sinks in. He is lifted off the ground effortlessly, feeling like a mere insect in the hands of a predator. Shaking like a leaf, he desperately questions how that arrow didn't pierce right through the monster's skull. The truth is terrifying, as Kadim reveals he caught the projectile between his teeth like it was nothing. Our boy casually spits out the metal tip, showing just how trash-tier their weaponry really is. Krivin is completely dumbfounded, unable to process how a human could catch a bolt at such close range. Kadim tells the coward to sit tight while he goes to finish off the rest of the trash. The air fills with the screams of his dying men, leaving the gang leader trembling in absolute despair. A heavy blade thuds into the dirt, signaling that the slaughter of the subordinates is finally complete. Covered in fresh blood, Kadim looms over him like a god of death ready to collect a debt. Realizing he is next, the pathetic leader starts blubbering and begs for even a sliver of mercy. Kadim calmly explains he won't kill him, but he definitely needs to slice his gut for that map. Terrified of being gutted, Krivin shrieks that there is no need since he has already memorized every detail. He spills everything about the ancient treasure hidden in a black chest deep beneath the center of Molden Castle. Our boy questions why this trash-tier bandit didn't just claim the loot himself if he knew the spot. A sweating Kreven explains that Molden is currently crawling with hundreds of soldiers, making the job impossible. Kadim ignores his excuses and demands to know exactly which army is besieging the castle and their motives. It turns out Viscount Adlin is leading a crusade against a lord accused of making demonic contracts. Our hero realizes this simple map recovery is quickly spiraling into a much more complicated and annoying situation. He suddenly draws his steel, making the bandit leader shriek in confusion since he already spilled his guts. Kadim coldly reminds him that he has absolutely no reason to trust the word of a pathetic criminal. The realization hits Kreven that his own earlier arrogance has finally sealed his miserable fate. With the trash finally cleared out, the forest settles into a heavy silence under the flickering campfire light. Kadim drops the shredded remains of the map and tells the merchant to start piecing the puzzle together. The merchant is absolutely dumbfounded when our boy casually mentions he fished the map out of a bandit's stomach. Kadim explains that since the trash-tier thug swallowed the evidence, he simply had to perform some forced retrieval. After some grim puzzle solving, the blood-soaked fragments finally reveal a path that matches the bandit leader's desperate claims. Our boy realizes the story about Molden Castle might actually be legit, making this whole mess even more annoying. He ponders the title of Demon Baron, wondering if this lord is a real threat or just another target. Meanwhile, a nearby village sits in a tense silence as Imperial forces begin their ruthless search for the fugitive. The local peasants are shaking like leaves, desperately trying to convince their interrogators that they haven't seen a soul. They swear on their lives that nothing out of the ordinary has happened, hoping to avoid the Empire's wrath. Helia stands tall with her knight, her sharp gaze cutting through the villagers' obvious fear and pathetic excuses. She coldly demands to know if they are willing to swear that lie before the holy name of Elga. Helia watches the villagers closely, sensing that their silence is bought with something far worse than imperial law. She challenges them to swear their innocence before the Lord of Light, knowing the religious weight that carries. The peasants are visibly shaking, their stuttering confirmation only making them look more guilty in her sharp eyes. Helia locks onto one woman, demanding to know if she truly dares to stake her soul on this lie. Turns out, our boy left them with a chilling warning to never mention the demon who saved them. Kadim promised to return and wipe out the entire village if a single word about him ever leaked out. Trapped between a holy knight and a literal monster, the poor woman can only offer a terrified, hollow oath. Helia is baffled because the tracks clearly lead here, yet these trash-tier liars keep insisting the road was empty. The man panics and swears no mercenary ever came by, desperately trying to stick to the script he's rehearsed. Helia smirks, realizing she has caught them since she never actually mentioned that her target was a mercenary. The villager mother is dumbfounded and visibly shaking, realizing her lies are starting to crumble under pressure. Helia stays silent, her hand resting on her sword as she waits for these peasants to slip up. The woman's heart is practically hammering against her ribs while she prays the paladin doesn't notice her terror. A sudden, agonizing scream cuts through the air, making the arch-paladin snap her head toward the noise. Helia stares at a nearby shack, wondering what kind of horror could produce such a gut-wrenching sound. The villagers frantically wave their hands and beg her to ignore it, claiming it's just a minor issue. Helia isn't buying their trash-tier excuses for a second, her sharp eyes narrowing with intense suspicion. She storms into the building with Eden close behind, only to find a sight that leaves her stunned. One of the village children lies on the floor, foaming at the mouth and twitching in total agony. Helia senses a demonic presence, yet the mother desperately insists the boy just has a simple chronic illness. Helia ignores the noise and steps forward, her sharp eyes fixed on the suffering boy. The mother collapses in desperation, begging the paladin to show mercy just this once. Helia ignores the pleas and calls upon the Lord of Light to purge the inner demons. She prepares to consecrate the young lamb, her resolve as cold and hard as her armor. As her hand touches his brow, a blinding radiance erupts to burn away the darkness. The entire shack is flooded with divine energy, forcing the shadows to retreat from the boy. The villagers are left dumbfounded by the cozy warmth, realizing a true miracle is unfolding within. Little Moroni finally stops twitching, his expression turning peaceful as the demonic whispers fade away. Helia looks down at the sobbing mother, confirming that her child is finally free from the devil. She declares that his soul is now protected, ensuring the whispers of hell will never return. The mother starts sobbing with gratitude, truly believing her boy has been saved from the darkness. Suddenly, a flash of holy fire erupts, shattering the peaceful moment with a violent burst of energy. Helia stands tall with her blade drawn, looking like she is cut from the same cloth as a reaper. She coldly explains that any lamb once stained by evil must be sacrificed to wash away the sin. The mother is dumbfounded as she sees Morona's head rolling away, still engulfed in divine flames. A blood-curdling scream fills the air as the woman realizes her child was just executed before her eyes. Helia looms over her, claiming the boy is now enjoying eternal rest by the side of her god. She then points her sword at the mother, labeling her an unbeliever for defying a sacred oath. If she does not want to wander in darkness for eons, she better start confessing the truth immediately. Her gaze turns predatory as she demands to know exactly where our boy went. Kadim and his forced guide settle down for the night under a vast, starlit sky. The merchant notes they have plenty of supplies now, thanks to our boy wiping out those bandit gangs. However, he admits that finding the high-tier weapons Kadim actually wants has been a total bust. Kadim shifts the focus, asking if the man knows anything about the mysterious Lord of Molden. The merchant recalls hearing about a demon baron, though he doubts the title comes from actual demonic pacts. He mentions a traveler who praised the city, suggesting the ruler isn't just some trash-tier tyrant. Kadim remains skeptical, knowing demons often lure people with prosperity only to drag them straight to hell. He realizes the only way to secure a legendary dwarven blade is to see the place for himself. Looking at his meager blood supply, he wonders if he can truly solo an entire army surrounding the castle. Sensing the heavy mood, the merchant nervously pipes up to ask our boy one final, lingering question. Kadim pauses, his interest piqued by the merchant's sudden shift in topic regarding his heritage. The merchant recalls Kadim calling himself the Great Warrior of Atala, and wonders who actually earns that prestigious title. Our boy narrows his eyes, demanding to know why a lowly merchant is suddenly so curious about his background. Turns out, a legendary mercenary known as Agon's Raging Horn has been parading around with that exact same name. Hearing that someone else is claiming his sacred title sends a jolt of pure shock through Kadim's system. He stands up so fast the merchant nearly jumps out of his skin, completely dumbfounded by the sudden movement. The poor guy immediately hits the dirt, begging for forgiveness for asking such a supposedly trash-tier question. Kadim ignores the groveling, noting that being a great warrior isn't just some flashy nickname for a decent fighter. It is a divine burden meant for the one soul destined to slaughter great demons for the wilderness god. Since there can only be one, Kadim realizes Agon is either a clueless poser or a very real threat. Our boy clenches his fist, bitter that his god might have replaced him with some trash-tier pretender. He tells the merchant to quit groveling and rest up because they are hitting the road at daybreak. With a heavy step, he begins to move, his mind swirling with thoughts of betrayal and lost glory. He wonders if he was truly abandoned, or if this Agon is just a dead man walking. Either way, Kadim vows to tear the imposter limb from limb the moment they finally cross paths. Soon, the imposing towers of Molden Castle loom in the distance, shrouded in a thick, gloomy fog. The perimeter is crawling with soldiers, their sharp spears glinting as they keep a tight watch. A massive military camp stretches out before the gates, signaling that a brutal siege is already underway. The guards remain oblivious to the shadows, focused only on the fortress they are currently surrounding. Hiding in the brush, Kadim and his guide scope out the layout, preparing to infiltrate the chaos. The merchant is sweating bullets, asking if our boy really plans to sneak past hundreds of elite soldiers. Kadim just shoots him a cold look and tells the trash-tier guide to hide while he goes solo. When the merchant panics, Kadim explains he will use the darkness to pick off the sentries one by one. Suddenly, a massive mechanical groan echoes through the valley as the heavy castle machinery begins to shift. Both of them are left dumbfounded as they watch the supposedly impenetrable fortress start to stir. The massive gates of Molden slowly creak open, making the merchant wonder if an all-out war is starting. Kadim knows he cannot hesitate, realizing this unexpected opening is the perfect chance to slip inside. He tells the terrified merchant to hold on tight, leaving the poor guy wondering what is about to happen. With a surge of blood-red mana, our boy grips his blade and prepares to break the sound barrier. He scoops up the guide and launches forward like a cannonball, leaving nothing but a crimson blur behind. Kadim decides to break through the blockade in one massive burst of speed. The Imperial soldiers march toward the gate, completely unaware of the monster approaching from behind. One guard senses something off, but he is too slow to even process the danger. Before he can even blink, a lethal pressure whistles past his ear like a reaper's scythe. Our boy tears through the formation, turning elite soldiers into headless statues in a heartbeat. Blood sprays the air as Kadim continues his gruesome dance, leaving nothing but carnage behind. He remains laser-focused, knowing that any delay will alert the entire garrison to his presence. Even while lugging around the terrified merchant, Kadim carves through the trash-tier guards with ease. Strangely, the remaining soldiers do not even flinch, as their allies are butchered right next to them. Kadim is left dumbfounded, wondering why these men show zero fear or agitation while facing certain death. Kadim doesn't care why these guards are fearless. He He just needs to breach the gate before it closes. He kicks off the ground with explosive force, moving faster than any normal human eye can track. Our boy comes face to face with another guard who realizes too late that he's standing before a monster. With a single, brutal strike, Kadim ends the man's life before he can even think of screaming. The impact is so violent it practically disintegrates the soldier, leaving only a crimson mist behind. Kadim takes a steady breath, his body humming with the raw power of a true blood berserker. Surveying the trash-tier corpses, he realizes he has finally reached the very front of the Imperial formation. His eyes burn with a predatory light as he prepares for the next phase of his bloody infiltration. Suddenly, the Viscount demands to know who this mysterious warrior is, sensing a threat unlike any other. The commander stands dumbfounded, unable to reconcile this savage power with anyone he has ever known. Kadim stares down the man, who nervously asks if our boy is actually the infamous demon baron. Viscount Adlin quickly denies the demonic rumors, claiming there are complicated circumstances behind his presence outside the castle. Ignoring the excuses, Kadim commands the noble to follow him, since he has plenty of questions to ask. The Viscount protests, insisting he was prepared to sacrifice his very life for the sake of Molden today. Kadim isn't buying the hero act, coldly telling the man to shut up and save his death for later. The narrative shifts back to the soldiers, who wonder exactly where their once noble mission started falling apart. Turns out, Adlin wasn't always this pathetic. Once personally carrying water to support his exhausted troops, he even knew his men by name, praising a young soldier for making his parents proud in service. The Viscount truly cared, realizing how grueling a 4-month siege is on the morale of his loyal men. He blamed himself for their suffering, believing his own incompetence as a lord was the root of their pain. A loyal soldier passionately defends his leader, claiming the Baron is innocent while blaming Adlin's greedy swindlers. Our boy Adlin listens to the man's defense with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of his failures. He offers his thanks but privately vows to stop the cycle of suffering for these young men. The guards are left completely dumbfounded, unable to understand why their commander looks so defeated. As the seasons shift and the air warms, the fear of freezing is finally crossed off their list. Adlin seeks out the Baroness, finding her sitting in a room that feels colder than the air outside. She knows him too well, immediately asking what is really on his mind, instead of the weather. He brings up the tulips she once ordered from a merchant, desperate to remember a peaceful world. Staring at the desolate grounds, he realizes her sense of beauty is a far cry from their reality. She shuts him down, reminding him that flowers are useless when the entire castle is currently starving. Adlin recalls seeing the castle's children digging up soil just to eat flower bulbs out of pure desperation. The Baroness is dumbfounded, wondering if he actually had the heart to scold the starving children for it. He admits he couldn't, feeling the crushing weight of guilt because their suffering is entirely his fault. Looking out at his ruined lands, he notes that 4 months of siege have left them with nothing. He decides that the only way to save his people is to die honorably and end the justification. His wife desperately argues that he isn't a demon and shouldn't have to pay this ultimate price. Adlin coldly points out that in politics, profit and justification always outweigh the actual truth of the matter. He instructs her to spread rumors to the Emperor or even defect if the siege doesn't break. Entrusting the future of their home to her, he hopes she can lead their people more wisely. He prepared to sacrifice himself as the demon baron, but then our boy Kadim decided to crash the party. Adlin is frozen in shock as Kadim suddenly appears and places a heavy hand on his shoulder. Our boy stands there like a god of war, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, blood-red intensity. One of the guards completely loses it, screaming in terror at the sight of this monster among them. He points toward the ranks, realizing that Adlin's loyal soldiers are suddenly falling apart in front of them. The troops begin to groan in agony, their bodies twisting as if some dark energy is taking hold. Suddenly, one soldier lets out a primal roar, his eyes turning red as he loses his humanity entirely. Kadim watches the chaos with cold indifference, while Adlin stares, unable to process the nightmare unfolding before him. Realizing the situation is spiraling out of control, the Viscount frantically orders his men to shut the gates. The massive iron portcullis slams down with a heavy thud, sealing the fate of those trapped outside. Now safely inside, Kadim looms over the panicked survivors while the groans of the transformed echo from beyond. The Imperial soldiers scream in absolute terror as the battlefield transforms into a literal nightmare. Viscount Adlin and his remaining guard stand frozen, unable to comprehend the monster standing before them. Our boy Kadim reaches out, his hand surging with a dark, crimson energy as he prepares to strike. He coldly demands a spear, leaving the Viscount paralyzed by the sheer weight of his murderous intent. His muscles bulge and veins throb as the blood berserker power flows through every fiber of his being. With a thunderous surge of strength, He hurls the weapon like a bolt of grim judgment. The spear whistles through the air, instantly impaling a helpless soldier through his light armor. Blood sprays across the ranks as the impact sends a wave of pure chaos through the Imperial line. Adlin is completely dumbfounded, desperately wondering who this barbarian is and why he possesses such terrifying power. Standing tall before the gate, Kadim simply looks for his next target with a chilling, stone-cold indifference. The spears fly with such force that the air itself seems to scream in terror. They tear through the ranks, turning the once disciplined soldiers into nothing more than a bloody mess. Panic spreads like wildfire as the survivors realize their only hope is to slam the gates shut. The massive iron grate begins its descent, but suddenly halts with a bone-jarring metallic thud. Our boy watches with a predatory gaze while the Viscount realizes the nightmare has only just begun. Deep inside the tower, the guards find the winch completely jammed, refusing to budge an inch. Adlin is utterly dumbfounded, feeling the cold hand of death finally tightening around his throat. Kadim just scoffs, his eyes burning with a crimson light that signals the end for everyone inside. The Viscount desperately barks orders, hoping a few more bodies can stop the inevitable slaughter. With the path half open, the blood berserker begins his slow, terrifying march toward the trembling defenders. Adlin's eyes nearly bulge out of his head as his men point toward the impossible sight at the gate. A massive, blood-slicked fist slams into the iron, carrying the weight of a true monster's rage. Our boy stares up at the heavy grate, wondering if this trash-tier metal can actually hold him back. He grinds his teeth and heaves, his muscles screaming as he attempts to overpower the entire mechanism alone. The massive iron structure groans in agony, unable to withstand the raw, supernatural strength of the blood berserker. While the gate slowly yields, the Imperial fodder rushes forward, realizing their fortress is about to be breached. Adlin loses his cool completely, screaming for his men to throw every rock and spear they have left. The terrified soldiers obey, launching a desperate volley of steel, hoping to pin the beast down. Spears rain down, and blood spatters the stone. But these pinpricks only serve to make him even angrier. Kadim warns his tagalongs to stay clear, preparing to turn this entrance into a literal slaughterhouse. The iron gate finally buckles under the pressure, slamming down as the path forward is cleared. Our boy stares through the bars at the terrified soldiers, who realize their defenses were just trashed here. He lets out a cold grunt, his eyes burning with the intensity of a true blood berserker. Stepping through the wreckage, he calmly tells the survivors to seal the entrance behind him. Adlin stands there absolutely dumbfounded, unable to comprehend how a single human possesses such monstrous, supernatural power. Kadim locks eyes with the noble, suggesting they have a peaceful chat before things get messy. Surprisingly, the tension breaks over a spread of warm soup and fresh bread that looks way too good. While the merchant stuffs his face like a starving animal, our boy remains cautious and alert. The merchant begs for seconds, completely forgetting he was almost a corpse just a few minutes ago. Kadim grows suspicious, wondering how a besieged castle still has a surplus of high-quality food to spare. The noble insists he would literally carve the flesh from his own thigh before letting a guest go hungry. Kadim remains unimpressed, questioning if this obsession with honor is what drove him to seek death outside. He admits that his pride was indeed a major factor in that desperate, suicidal charge. Our boy wants the real truth behind the madness and why he would throw his life away so easily. Realizing he can't hide it, the noble prepares to recount the long, bloody history of his fallen territory. It all started when he was sent to transform this barren, dangerous wasteland into something habitable for his people. After a decade of backbreaking work, he turned the ruins into the prosperous and peaceful city of Molden. However, his success caught the eye of a jealous neighbor who was cut from a much darker cloth. This rival lord couldn't handle Molden's growth and began a campaign of spiteful, venomous lies to destroy him. He branded the noble as a demon baron, claiming he had sold his soul to the devil for prosperity. Kadim listens as the noble explains that nobody took those trash-tier borderland rumors seriously at the start. Everything changed when the fourth prince fell for the rival's daughter, giving that snake some serious imperial backing. With the emperor's silent nod, the neighbor lord led a crusade to wipe out the so-called demon baron. Viscount Adlin admits he chose a suicidal charge because he couldn't stand watching his people starve during the siege. Our boy finds it suspicious that the enemy could keep 400 soldiers fed for months without any progress. The noble wonders if the imperial family is pulling the strings from the shadows to keep the siege alive. Kadim remains silent, realizing the political rot in this world goes much deeper than he initially thought. Finally, the Viscount asks who he really is, and what business could possibly justify wrecking an entire camp. Instead of a name, Kadim asks if there is a fist-shaped rock sitting right in the center of the castle. The noble is completely dumbfounded, confirming the rock is in the basement, while wondering how a stranger knows. Kadim tells the noble to take him to the rock so he can finally leave this place. However, the Viscount stands his ground, claiming that the basement is strictly off-limits to everyone. Our boy isn't one for games, and demands to know the specific reason behind this sudden secrecy. The noble offers a stiff apology, explaining that he simply cannot share such information with an outsider. Kadim's expression darkens as he realizes this simple request is turning into another trash-tier headache. Watching from the side, the merchant guide starts sweating, terrified by the heavy pressure filling the room. A tense silence follows as the two men lock eyes, neither one willing to back down. Kadim finds it ridiculous that he's being blocked without even a shred of an explanation. He lets out a weary sigh, knowing deep down that things were going way too smoothly. His gaze sharpens with lethal intent, signaling that if he can't walk in, hell force his way. Viscount Adlin is completely dumbfounded by the sudden, suffocating pressure radiating from the man across the table. Our boy slams his hand down with a heavy thud, signaling that the polite negotiations are officially over. Adlin starts sweating bullets as he realizes he's trapped in a room with a literal force of nature. Kadim mentions the 100 soldiers stationed in the castle, comparing their fragile lives to a common house bug. He reminds the noble that they are surrounded by enemies, and that hiding is only a temporary delay. As he slowly crushes the insect, he warns that every soul in Molden will die in vain tonight. Kadim decides to be generous for once, and offers the Viscount a final choice to avoid a massacre. He demands to be led to the basement immediately, or he'll paint the entire city with innocent blood. Adlin shudders, knowing deep down that this isn't some trash-tier bluff. The threat is terrifyingly real. He closes his eyes in bitter regret, realizing he never should have let this dangerous outsider through his gates. Adlin finally folds, agreeing to lead our boy to the basement to end this tense standoff. However, the noble isn't just giving in for free, and insists on setting a specific condition first. Kadim stares him down, clearly annoyed that this trash-tier noble thinks he's in any position to bargain. Adlin explains that if he falls in battle, he needs Kadim to step up and defend the castle. He promises his steward will provide the directions only after the impending imperial attack is successfully repelled. Kadim just scoffs, asking if the Viscount actually believes throwing his life away counts as being honorable. Adlin looks completely dumbfounded as Kadim deconstructs his noble sacrifice as nothing more than a pathetic escape. Our boy points out that leaving the mess to a total stranger is just running away from duty. The weight of those words hits Adlin hard, forcing him to reconsider his desperate plan to play martyr. Kadim doubles down, calling the act of dying in vain a coward's move rather than a hero's sacrifice. Kadim clenches his fist, explaining that his people, the Atalans, have a completely different outlook on life and death. He describes how even with crushed bones and spilled guts, an Atalan warrior fights back until their last breath. To him, that relentless struggle is the only thing that truly defines an honorable death in their warrior culture. Viscount Adlin sits in silence, clearly shaken by the sheer intensity of the barbarian's philosophy compared to his own. Sensing the shift, our boy decides to throw a different offer on the table to see if the noble listens. The room remains tense as Kadim waits for a reaction, while the terrified merchant just tries to stay invisible. He demands to know if the Viscount is finally willing to accept this new deal, instead of dying pointlessly. Adlin finally relents, asking for some time to process everything while offering Kadim a place to stay for now. A servant leads them through the grand halls of the inner castle, though the atmosphere remains heavy with tension. As they walk, Kadim remains alert, knowing his words have finally started to crack the noble's stubborn resolve. Kadim tells the merchant to take the bed and rest, showing a rare bit of practical consideration for his guide. He sets his weapon aside for now, though his instincts remain sharp and ready for any sudden betrayal. Even while relaxing, our boy's massive frame serves as a constant, terrifying reminder of his overwhelming physical power. The merchant fidgets nervously as he settles in, clearly still terrified to be sharing a room with this monster. He cautiously asks if the Baron will actually accept the deal, fearing their luck might have finally run out. Kadim remains calm and explains that the noble has no other choice since the offer is actually quite fair. The merchant admits he thought things were going south when the Baron suddenly became so firm and unyielding. He wonders aloud why the noble was so stubbornly trying to block their access to the castle's basement. Our boy just stares back with those intense eyes, claiming the reason for the noble's behavior is completely obvious. The poor merchant is left totally dumbfounded, unable to see the hidden truth that Kadim has already pieced together. The door creaks open as the heavy tension in the room finally reaches its inevitable breaking point. Our boy sits like a predator on the sofa, his presence alone enough to make any noble sweat. Viscount Adlin stands firm, trying to maintain his dignity despite the terrifying aura radiating from his guest. Kadim notes the noble's quick return and asks if he is finally ready to accept the deal. Realizing he has no other choice, the Viscount gives a slow, resigned nod to the barbarian's demands. Our boy tells him to get ready, as the moon hangs high over the dark, quiet lands. Molden Castle stands silent under the night sky, hiding the secrets that Kadim is determined to uncover. The sentries maintain their patrol, unaware that their lord has just invited a wolf into their cellar. One guard suddenly freezes when he hears a suspicious noise echoing through the cold, midnight air. They shout for identification as Kadim calmly approaches, ready to tear the truth from the castle depths. Adlin quickly silences the confused guard, making sure nobody else catches wind of their late-night operation. The officer is completely dumbfounded, wondering why his lord is geared up and roaming the ramparts at midnight. Adlin snaps at him to stay professional, reminding the man that he is the one in charge here. He orders the squad to stop asking questions and start securing a heavy rope to the main pillars. With a grim expression, the Viscount warns them to stay inside the walls regardless of the chaos outside. The soldiers get to work, tightening the line while our boy prepares to dive into the dark abyss. Without a hint of hesitation, Kadim grips the rope and launches himself over the edge of the wall. He descends with terrifying speed, moving with a grace that contradicts his massive, muscular frame. Adlin just watches in silence, stunned that a human can move with such predatory agility and raw power. Viscount Adlin grips the rope tightly, his heart heavy, as he watches the barbarian disappear into the midnight gloom. He begins calling out the names of his most trusted men, his voice carrying the weight of a final command. The soldiers stand at attention, their expressions a mix of grim determination and deep respect for their lord. He tells them that Molden is more precious than his own life and charges them with its absolute protection. The men are visibly moved, realizing the gravity of the mission their lord is about to embark upon. Our boy waits by the massive gate, dryly asking if the Viscount is finally done with his emotional farewells. Kadim has no patience for sentimentality, his mind already focused on the blood that needs to be spilled. Viscount Adlin closes his eyes for a brief moment, steeling his resolve before confirming that he is truly ready. With a sharp ring of steel, our boy draws his blade, ready to march out and slaughter their target.